The metallic taste of regret was bitter, far more so than the lukewarm coffee that barely touched my lips. "Dad, we're off to Europe first thing tomorrow. Oh, and about your little cliffside villa. It's been sold. The new owners, Olympus Realty Holdings, want the keys by noon, so you need to be out. Ta-ta." My daughter, Scarlett, didn't wait for a response. The line went dead, leaving a silent, hollow echo in the spacious living room I had called home for decades. She thought she had won. She believed the $8 million that had just landed in her and Blake's account was theirs to keep, a golden ticket to a life of perpetual luxury and irresponsibility. I stared at the phone in my trembling hand, then out at the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean, its morning light shimmering like scattered diamonds. This view, the soundtrack of my peace, I'd cherished for over 20 years, from this very deck in Laguna Beach. My reply was a whisper, a promise murmured to the empty air and the rhythmic crash of waves below. "You forgot one thing, honey. The most important thing." Had she stayed on the line, she would have laughed, her voice probably laced with that condescending tone she reserved for my senior moments. She would have called me senile, a foolish old man clinging to fantasies. And I, Arthur Pendleton, would have laughed right back. Because the house she'd so confidently sold, the house she envisioned funding her European sabbatical, wasn't entirely hers to begin with. Not really. Not the way it truly mattered. But before I tell you how I meticulously turned their moment of triumph into a slow, dawning nightmare, a reality that would eclipse any fiction, know this. I believed in blood. I believed in family. I believed in the sanctity of a home built on love and shared dreams. My name is Art Pendleton, and until that morning, I thought I was the luckiest man in all of Orange County. At 72, I had my health, robust enough to still enjoy a morning walk down to Victoria Beach and a vigorous round of golf. I had the palpable, cherished memories of my late wife, Eleanor, her spirit woven into every thread of our beautiful cliffside villa, from the vibrant hydrangeas she'd nurtured in the garden to the specific scent of her lavender sachets that still lingered in our bedroom closet. And I had, or so I believed, the unwavering love of my daughter, Scarlett. I sat on my expansive teak deck at precisely 7 a.m., the salt-laced air filling my lungs with a bracing coolness, watching the relentless dance of the waves against the craggy coastline below. This house, this sanctuary, was last appraised at just over $12 million. But to Eleanor and me, it was utterly priceless. This was where we'd started every single morning for 35 years. Our coffee steaming as we talked about our day, our dreams, our burgeoning family. It was where we'd watch Scarlett take her first tentative steps across the sun-drenched living room floor, her chubby arms outstretched towards her mother's loving embrace. This house wasn't just real estate. It was the repository of our entire shared history, a testament to a life well lived, a monument to a love that transcended even death. It was supposed to be my haven, my final quiet harbor until the day I joined Eleanor in whatever comes next. I took another measured sip of my black coffee, the robust bitterness, a familiar comfort, my gaze sweeping across the tranquil, almost deceptively serene surface of the Pacific. I was just an old man, wasn't I? Retired, enjoying the quiet rhythms of the ocean, perhaps indulging in the occasional crossword puzzle or a game of bingo at the community center down in Laguna Hills. That's what everyone thought. That's what I allowed them to believe. But 10 years ago, when Eleanor's health began to falter, when the doctors started using words like long-term care and estate planning, I made a decision. It was a strategic move, born not of cunning, but of a deep-seated desire to protect Eleanor and our legacy from the complexities of estate taxes and the labyrinthine delays of probate courts. I had always been pragmatic, a forward thinker in business, and I applied that same logic to my personal life. I transferred the primary title of the house, the physical structure, the building itself, to Scarlett. It was meant as a profound gesture of trust, a father securing his daughter's future, ensuring she would never know financial hardship. I remembered the day clearly. Scarlett, then in her early 20s, had wept in my arms as I signed the papers in Jem Finch's downtown office. She'd hugged me fiercely, promising with tear-filled eyes that nothing would ever change, that this would always be my home, a constant beacon in her life. I believed her. I believed in the immutable strength of blood, in the sacred bond between a father and his child. I believed that all the love and guidance I'd poured into raising her would be returned tenfold when I was old and vulnerable. I was wrong, terribly, dangerously wrong. The shrill ringing of my phone on the vintage glass-top table shattered the morning's peace, ripping through the quiet like a sudden gunshot. It was Scarlett. A faint, hopeful smile touched my lips. Perhaps she was calling to invite me to brunch, maybe a visit, a rare moment of connection. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, my voice rich with an affection I still held for the little girl I remembered. But the voice that answered was not that of the child I had cherished, nor even the young woman I knew. It was cold, sharp, and rushed, devoid of warmth, like a hurried order placed at a drive-through window. "Dad, listen, I don't have much time. We sold the house. The deal closed yesterday." I froze. The coffee cup, halfway to my mouth, hovered in the air, forgotten. My mind, usually as sharp as a newly honed blade, struggled to process the words, to make sense of the jarring pronouncement. "What did you say?" I asked, a tremor in my voice, convinced I had misheard, that my aging ears had played a cruel trick. I said, "We sold the house, Dad. The wire transfer just cleared. Blake and I are moving to Europe for a while. We need a fresh start, and the market's peaking, so we cashed out. The buyers are Olympus Realty Holdings. They want the property vacant immediately. You need to pack your things. The movers are already on their way." I slowly pushed myself up from my chair, the metal legs scraping loudly against the deck tiles, a harsh counterpoint to the quiet devastation unfolding within me. "Scarlett, this is my home. You can't just sell my home. We talked about this. You promised me." Her laugh was dry, brittle, utterly devoid of genuine emotion, a sound that scraped against my raw nerves. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Dad. It's just a building. Besides, it's legally in my name. I can do whatever I want with it. Blake and I have debts, Dad. Real debts. We need this money. We found you a room at the Ponderosa Inn down the highway for a few nights until you can figure out a nursing home or something. Look, I have to go. The movers are literally pulling up now. Bye." The line went dead with an abrupt click, a punctuation mark on my betrayal. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the blank screen as if it held the answers to the seismic shift in my world. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird desperate for escape. A motel. She was putting me in a motel. After all I had given her, this $12 million asset that represented a lifetime of struggle and triumph, she was tossing me aside like a discarded piece of trash, an expired relic of a past she no longer wanted to acknowledge. I tried to call her back, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Blocked. My own daughter, the flesh of my flesh, had severed all ties, severing me from her life as easily as she had severed me from my home. I barely had time to process the searing pain of this betrayal before I heard the unmistakable crunch of heavy tires on the gravel driveway. My legs felt like lead, each step a monumental effort as I walked towards the front door. A massive moving truck, emblazoned with the logo of a national moving company, was backing up towards my garage, its diesel engine rumbling ominously. Behind it, a sleek black SUV glided to a stop. The door opened, and out stepped Blake, my son-in-law. He was 40 years old, a man whose ambition vastly outstripped his talent, wearing a designer suit that was too tight across his inflated chest and sunglasses that cost more than my first car. He walked with an arrogant swagger that turned my stomach, a self-important strut that belonged to a man who truly believed he had conquered the world. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the doorbell. He simply produced a key, asterisk my Times key, and let himself in. The front door swung open with a theatrical flourish, and Blake marched in, followed by 3 burly men in matching uniforms. "Art," he announced, not even bothering to look at me, his eyes scanning the living room like he was inspecting a warehouse. "Let's make this quick. We're on a tight schedule." I stepped in front of him, my hands shaking. Not from fear, no. It was from a potent, volcanic surge of rage, a primal fury I hadn't felt in decades, a rage that clawed at my insides. Blake, what in God's name is going on? You cannot do this! This is my house! Eleanor's things are here! Blake stopped, slowly lowering his expensive sunglasses, fixing me with a gaze of pure, unadulterated contempt. Actually, old man, he drawled, his voice laced with thinly veiled malice, this is Scarlett's house, and now it belongs to Olympus Realty Holdings. You're just a squatter. He snapped his fingers at the movers like a general commanding his troops. Start with the living room. Anything that looks valuable goes in the truck. Everything else goes into those black trash bags. I watched in silent horror as strangers, brute forces of destruction, began to systematically dismantle my life, piece by precious piece. One of them, a young man with a vacant expression, picked up a porcelain vase from the mantel. It was a delicate blue and white piece, hand-painted, that Eleanor had bought on our honeymoon in Italy. A small, unassuming treasure. It wasn't worth much money, not really, but it was everything to me, a tangible link to our love. Hey, put that down, I shouted, my voice raw, reaching for it instinctively. The mover hesitated, looking to Blake for guidance. Blake waved his hand dismissively, his face a mask of bored impatience. It's old junk. Toss it. The man dropped the vase into a black plastic trash bag. The sound of the porcelain shattering, a sharp, sickening crack, broke something deep inside of me. A final tether, a last fragile cord, snapped. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a ghost of its former strength. I gave you everything. I helped you with your failed car dealership. I paid for your lavish wedding. Why, Blake? Blake laughed, a cruel, ugly sound that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the house. Because we need the cash, Art. We have a lifestyle to maintain. And quite frankly, you're a burden. You're just sitting here on $12 million of equity, watching the tide roll in, while Scarlett and I are drowning. It's selfish, really. Selfish. He called times me times selfish. The audacity was breathtaking, a slap across the face that left a burning mark. He walked over to the hallway table where a framed photo of Eleanor and me on our wedding day sat, our younger selves beaming with hope and love. He picked it up, examined it for a second, a sneer twisting his lips, and then casually tossed it into the nearest garbage bag. You're living in the past, old man, and the past doesn't pay the bills. I stared at the black plastic bag where my wife's smiling face had just disappeared. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to scream until my throat was raw. I wanted to tear him apart, limb from limb, for his callous disregard, his casual cruelty. But then, a strange, cold calm washed over me. It wasn't resignation. It was the hard, sharp clarity, the focused intensity I used to feel in the cutthroat boardrooms of downtown Los Angeles 30 years ago, when I was known as the Maestro, a man who orchestrated hostile takeovers and built an empire out of sheer will and intellect. They thought I was just a senile old man who fished and watched sunsets. They forgot who Arthur Pendleton was before he retired, before he traded boardroom battles for quiet contemplation. They forgot that I was the one who had taught them, in my own way, how to read a contract, how to spot the hidden dangers, how to play the long game. I didn't say another word. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I simply walked over to the trash bag, reached in, ignoring the greasy detritus, and pulled out the photo of Eleanor and me. I carefully dusted off the frame, tucking it under my arm like a sacred relic. Then I walked to the coat rack and deliberately grabbed my favorite tweed jacket, the one Eleanor had bought me for our anniversary years ago. Where do you think you're going? Blake sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. I thought you were going to put up a fight, old man. I turned, looking him dead in the eye. My posture straightened, the years of frailty seemed to melt away, replaced by an innate strength I hadn't summoned in a lifetime. You want the house, Blake? Take it. Take it all. I hope it's worth it. My voice was calm, steady, and chillingly devoid of emotion. I walked out the front door, past the monstrous moving truck, past the manicured flower beds Eleanor had so painstakingly tended, and down the long, curving driveway. I didn't look back at the breathtaking ocean view. I didn't glance at the garden. I just kept walking, my gaze fixed on the horizon, until I reached the main coast road. I hailed a passing taxi, a beat-up yellow cab, and told the driver to take me to the Ponderosa Inn on the edge of town, a place where dreams went to die. As we drove away, the ocean becoming a distant, shimmering memory, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I didn't call Scarlett. I didn't call the police. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, a number etched into my memory from a different lifetime. "Jem," I said when the gruff voice on the other end answered. "It's Art. Dust off your suit. We have work to do. And Jem, bring the Sentinel file from 2005. Yes, the one with the land trusts. They want to play dirty? Fine. Let's show them how the game is times really times played. They just evicted the wrong man." The harsh, aggressive rip of packing tape tearing off the dispenser echoed through the vast, now hollow hallway of my Laguna Beach home, each sound like a jagged tear in the fabric of my life. I stood in the corner of what had been Eleanor's in my master bedroom, feeling utterly disembodied, a ghost in my own existence, watching three strangers systematically dismantle 40 years of shared history in less than 40 minutes. Blake, my smug son-in-law, stood in the very center of the room, barking orders like a self-important general on a battlefield. His manicured finger, adorned with an absurdly large signet ring, pointed at the built-in bookshelves, the sprawling walk-in closet Eleanor had loved, the antique dresser that had been passed down through generations. He clutched a clipboard in one hand and a half-drunk, over-sweetened latte in the other, his expression a mixture of profound boredom and irritation, as if my very existence and its subsequent disposal was an inconvenience he barely had time for. He gestured with that same manicured finger towards the mahogany bookshelf where Eleanor had kept her cherished collection of vintage gardening books. These weren't just any books. They were her pride and joy, her tangible connection to the earth and the beauty she coaxed from it. Their margins were filled with her delicate, looping handwritten notes, observations on soil acidity and sunlight, and between their brittle, yellowed pages, I knew, were pressed flowers from countless springs and summers we had spent together, tending the earth side by side, our hands intertwined as we planted the future. "Trash it," Blake commanded, taking a languid sip of his coffee. "Nobody reads books anymore, especially not dusty old manuals on how to grow hydrangeas. Toss them in the black bags. Don't be gentle." The mover, a young kid who looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else, perhaps surfing or playing video games, hesitated for a second, his eyes lingering on the beautiful leather bindings, the gold leaf titles. "Just do it," Blake snapped, his voice rising sharply. "We're paying you by the hour, not by the tear shed. Time is money, kid, and this is costing me." I watched, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach, as the kid, with a heavy sigh that was almost apologetic, swept his arm across the shelf, knocking the treasured books into a heavy-duty black garbage bag. The dull thud they made as they hit the bottom of the bag was a sound that vibrated deep in my chest, a physical blow. I took a hesitant step forward, my hand raising instinctively, a desperate, futile gesture to stop him, to reclaim those memories. But I froze. What was the point? The house, the physical structure of it, was sold. The legal title, on paper, was in Scarlett's name. I was just an old man shouting at the indifferent tide, a forgotten relic in a rapidly changing world. I turned away from the brutal, unfeeling destruction of the bookshelf and walked over to the nightstand on my side of the bed. A small, intricately carved mahogany box sat there, a silent sentinel. Inside, I knew, was my Patek Philippe watch, a cherished gift from Eleanor on our 25th wedding anniversary. It wasn't just a timepiece. It was a symbol, a tangible representation of the time we had shared, the beautiful, precious time she had gifted me with her presence, her love, her very being. I reached out to grab it, my fingers brushing against the smooth, polished wood, the memories flooding back with agonizing clarity. Suddenly, a hand slammed down on top of the box, pinning it to the table with a jarring force. I looked up, startled, into Blake's face. He was smiling, but it wasn't a kind smile, not a genuine one. It was the predatory, calculating grin of a cat playing with a terrified mouse, savoring its impending demise. "You won't be needing this," Art, he said, his voice dripping with a false, saccharine concern that was more cutting than any outright malice. I tried to pull the box free, but he leaned his full weight onto it, immobilizing it. "Blake, that's my watch," I said, my voice trembling now, not from fear, but from a suppressed rage that threatened to erupt. "Eleanor gave that to me. It's personal property. It's irreplaceable." Blake shook his head, clicking his tongue against his teeth in a gesture of dismissive pity. "Pops, look at you. You're going to a nursing home, or a motel, or wherever Scarlett booked you. A watch like this, it's worth at least $25,000 on the open market. It'll just get stolen. You don't need to know the time where you're going. The days are all the same when you're just waiting to die." He snatched the box off the table with a sudden, swift movement and shoved it deep into the expensive pocket of his designer jacket. "I'll keep this safe for you. Consider it a handling fee for the trouble of moving you out. Think of it as a small administrative cost for your relocation." I stared at him, my fists clenching at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. The sheer audacity, the blatant, unvarnished thievery, was breathtaking. He wasn't just evicting me, he was looting me. He was stripping the very copper wire out of the walls of my life, pilfering my past, my memories, my dignity. "Why are you doing this, Blake?" The question escaped my lips before I could stop it. Not a plea, but a desperate demand for some semblance of logic in a situation that felt utterly insane. "I gave you everything. I welcomed you into this family when you were nothing but a failed used car salesman with a mountain of debt. I paid for your wedding. I helped you get your brokerage license, lent you capital. Why treat me like an enemy? Why treat Eleanor's home like a liquidation sale?" Blake laughed, a sharp, barking sound that made the movers look up from their grim work, momentarily pausing their systematic destruction. He stepped closer to me, invading my personal space, his expensive cologne assaulting my senses, a suffocating aura of arrogance radiating from him. "You still don't get it, do you, old man?" He gestured grandly around the room, encompassing the panoramic ocean view, the soaring ceilings, the prime real estate that was the envy of Laguna Beach. "You are sitting on a gold mine, Art, and you're treating it like a dusty old museum. This house, to you, is a dead asset. You just sit here, drink your decaf coffee, and look at the water. It's a waste." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, his eyes glinting with a cold, hard ambition. "Scarlett and I, we have plans, big plans. We need liquidity. We need cold, hard cash to live the life we deserve. The market is scorching hot right now. We're talking about millions of dollars that are just locked up in wood and drywall because you're too sentimental to let go. We want to live a classy life, Art. We want the country club memberships, the private jet trips to Saint-Tropez, the cars that turn heads, the kind of Instagram-perfect existence you just couldn't comprehend. We're not content to just sit and rot like you, watching the waves roll in. Selling this place solves all our problems. You are the only times thing standing in the way of our happiness. So, we're removing the obstacle, permanently." I looked at him then, truly looked at him, and I saw the utter emptiness behind his expensive sunglasses. He didn't see a home, he saw an ATM machine. He didn't see a father-in-law, a man who had offered him a hand up. He saw a liability, a drain on resources. It wasn't about hate, it was far worse. It was about pure, unadulterated indifference. He didn't care enough to hate me. I was just a line item on a balance sheet that needed to be deleted, a number to be zeroed out. Just then, one of the movers walked past us, carrying a large, heavy-framed photograph. It was the centerpiece of our living room, the beautiful portrait from our wedding day. Eleanor, radiant in her white lace dress, her head thrown back in joyous laughter, looking at me like I was the only star in the sky, and me, a younger, more hopeful Art, gazing back at her with a love so profound it still made my heart ache. The glass caught the morning light, reflecting the shimmering ocean outside, a cruel juxtaposition of past joy and present despair. "Hey, wait!" Blake shouted at the mover, snapping him to a halt. The man stopped, the heavy frame balanced precariously in his hands. Blake walked over, tapped the glass of the photo frame with a contemptuous finger. "Nobody wants this old junk. The frame is dated. It's garbage. Dump it. The mover hesitated again, a flicker of humanity in his eyes. Sir, it looks like a family photo. Maybe he wants to keep it, he ventured, glancing at me. Dump it, Blake bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. We are not moving a museum of ancient history. Everything in this house that isn't cash or jewelry goes in the trash. Do I have to do everything myself? He snatched the frame from the mover's hands, looked at it for a split second, sneering at the image of my cherished happiness, and then he threw it. He didn't just drop it gently. He hurled it like a frisbee into the large, rolling industrial trash bin they had wheeled into the hallway. The sound of the glass shattering was louder than the waves crashing outside, louder than the rumble of the moving truck. It sounded like a bone breaking, a final, irreparable fracture. It sounded like the last snap of the tether that held me, however tenuously, to this family. The room went silent. The movers looked down at their feet, suddenly uncomfortable, ashamed. Blake, however, dusted off his hands, looking utterly satisfied, as if he had just accomplished some great, triumphant feat. There, he said, a smug smile spreading across his face. Clean slate. Out with the old, in with the new. I walked over to the trash bin, my movements slow, deliberate, each step a conscious act of will. I wasn't shaking anymore. The fear was gone. The overwhelming sadness, too, seemed to have been cauterized. In their place, something cold and hard had begun to form, like a steel beam forging in a white-hot furnace. I reached into the bin, ignoring the jagged shards of glass that sliced into my thumb, drawing a thin line of red. I pulled out the photo. The glass was gone, but the picture itself, miraculously, was intact. Eleanor was still smiling, her eyes twinkling with the joy of our wedding day. I carefully brushed a piece of broken glass off her beloved face. I didn't look at Blake. I didn't scream. I just stood there, holding the photo against my chest, a silent vow being made in the depths of my soul. You're pathetic, Blake spat, adjusting his silk cuffs, oblivious to the profound shift in my being. Take your pathetic picture and get out. Olympus Realty will be here at 8 a.m. to bulldoze this place anyway. You're just saving trash from a landfill. I turned to face him. My eyes were dry. My expression was one of absolute, unyielding stone. For the first time all morning, Blake looked genuinely uncomfortable. He took a half step back, unnerved by the sudden, terrifying shift in my demeanor. He had expected tears. He had expected begging. He had expected the defeated old man. He did not expect the chilling gaze of a man who had just decided to go to war, and who knew, with terrifying certainty, he would win. I am leaving, Blake, I said, my voice low and steady, a dangerous calm beneath the surface. You can have the house, you can have the furniture, you can have the view, but remember this moment. Remember the sound of that glass breaking, because it is the last victory you are ever going to have. The very last. I walked past him, shouldering past his expensive suit without an excuse me. The unspoken contempt, a tangible force between us. I walked out of the master bedroom, down the hallway, where the faint outlines of missing paintings stood out like ghosts on the walls. And through the front door, the cool, indifferent sea air hit my face, a stark contrast to the inferno raging within me. I didn't look back at the house. I walked down the driveway to the street, where the beat-up taxi I had called earlier was still waiting. As I climbed into the back seat, I looked at the photo of Eleanor in my lap. I wiped a single drop of blood from my thumb onto the frame, a crimson promise. They wanted a classy life. I was going to give them a lesson in economics, in law, and in consequence, that they would never, ever forget. The eviction, the physical act, was over. The execution was about to begin. The plastic key card, flimsy and cheap, didn't work the first time I slid it into the lock. The little red light blinked at me, a mocking signal of my sudden incompetence, my plummet from the heights of Laguna Beach to this ignominious reality. My hands, still trembling slightly, tried again, until finally, with a soft click, it turned green. I pushed the door open and was immediately assaulted by the smell. It was a thick, suffocating mixture of industrial lemon cleaner, trying desperately to mask stale cigarette smoke, sweat, And something else, something indefinable but profoundly present: despair. I stepped inside room 104 of the Ponderosa Inn, letting the heavy, hollow door swing shut behind me. It latched with a metallic clank that sounded utterly final, like the door of a prison cell closing on a dream. I walked over to the single window and pulled back the flimsy polyester curtain. There was no panoramic ocean view here. There was no shimmering horizon where the blue sky met the blue water, no distant sailboats gliding gracefully. Instead, I was staring at a cracked, pockmarked asphalt parking lot, its faded lines barely visible, and the relentless, roaring stream of traffic on the interstate highway just beyond. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of modern life devoid of rhythm or solace. 18-wheelers rumbled past, rattling the thin glass in the window frame with a percussive force. Sirens wailed in the distance, a mournful, urgent cry that punctuated the constant drone. It was a brutal assault on my senses, a chaotic symphony of noise that brutally replaced the rhythmic, soothing crash of the waves I had listened to for 30 years. The ocean's steady heartbeat. Just 24 hours ago, I had been drinking single-origin Colombian coffee on a handcrafted teak deck in my multi-million-dollar cliffside villa. Now, I was standing on a sticky, suspiciously stained carpet in a roadside motel, clutching a framed photograph of my dead wife like it was a life preserver in a raging storm, the only anchor in a world turned upside down. I sat down on the edge of the mattress. It sagged under my weight, the springs groaning in protest, a weary sound that mirrored my own soul. I gently placed Eleanor's photo on the cheap laminate bedside table, next to the bolted-down lamp whose shade was torn. I looked at her face, still smiling out from behind the crack in the glass that Blake had so cruelly caused. "I'm sorry, Ellie," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "I promised I'd keep our home safe. I promised I'd keep our family together. I failed. I failed you." For the first hour, I just sat there. I didn't unpack the 2 duffel bags that held the sum total of my 72 years on this earth, the meager remnants of a once grand life. I just listened to the persistent hum of the mini-fridge and the heavy thumping of footsteps from the room above, a constant reminder of other lives, other stories, utterly disconnected from my own. I felt hollowed out, utterly depleted, like a husk of a man whose spirit had been ripped away. I kept replaying the scene in the living room, Blake's sneer, Scarlett's cold, calculating voice on the phone. How had I not seen this coming? How had I been so utterly blind to their rapacious greed, their bottomless entitlement? I had spent my entire life building a fortune, building a legacy, a name that commanded respect, only to end up here, discarded and alone, an inconvenient truth swept under the rug. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me, yanking me back to the present with a jolt. I pulled it out, my heart giving a small, pathetic leap, half expecting, half hoping. It was Scarlett, calling to apologize, calling to say it was all a terrible, tragic mistake, a misunderstanding born of stress. But it wasn't a call. It was an email notification. The subject line, stark and ominous, read, "Important update regarding Dad." My stomach twisted into a painful knot. I saw the distribution list. It wasn't just to me. It was sent to everyone. My brother in Detroit, my cousins in Ohio, my old business partners, even some of our closest family friends. She had copied the entire contact list, systematically broadcasting her narrative. My hands shook as I opened the message, each letter a fresh stab of pain. "Dearest family and friends," the email began, a sickeningly sweet prelude to the poison within. "It is with a heavy heart that Blake and I have to share some difficult news. As many of you know, Dad has been struggling lately. His memory is fading, and he has been making erratic, sometimes dangerous decisions. It has become clear to us that he can no longer live alone in the big house safely." I stopped reading, my breath catching in my throat, a choked gasp of disbelief. Struggling? Erratic? I was sharper than men half my age. I managed my own complex investment portfolio, navigated intricate market trends, and still ran a small consulting business from my study. I drove without glasses, my reflexes honed by years of competitive tennis. This was a lie, a carefully constructed fabrication meant to disarm, to deflect, to deceive. I forced myself to read on, the words burning into my retina. After consulting with doctors, the email continued. A masterful piece of manipulation. We made the heartbreaking decision to sell the Laguna Beach property. The upkeep was too much for him, and frankly, he was letting it fall into disrepair. We have used the proceeds to secure him a spot in a top-tier assisted living facility where he can get the professional care he needs. We are currently handling the transition, but as you can imagine, he is very confused and angry. If he reaches out to you, telling strange stories about being evicted or asking for money, please understand that this is the dementia talking. We are doing this for his own good. We love him dearly and only want him safe. We are taking a sabbatical in Europe to recover from the stress of this transition. Please respect our privacy during this difficult time. Love, Scarlett. I dropped the phone on the bedspread. It stared up at me, glowing malevolently in the dim motel light, a beacon of betrayal. The audacity was truly breathtaking, a brazen act of psychological violence. She wasn't just stealing my house. She was stealing my dignity. She was stealing my voice, my very identity. She was preemptively discrediting me to everyone I knew, painting me as a senile, pathetic old man who needed to be managed, while she ran off to Europe with $8 million of my legacy. She was gaslighting the entire family, twisting reality until it was unrecognizable. She wanted to make absolutely sure that if I called for help, if I cried out for justice, no one would believe me. They would just pity poor Scarlett for having to deal with her crazy father. I felt a hot, salty tear slide down my cheek, a rogue emotion breaking through my carefully constructed composure. I wiped it away angrily, disgusted by my own weakness. And then something shifted. As I sat there in that dingy, malodorous room, reading those calculated, venomous lies, the profound sadness began to evaporate. The crushing grief that had been weighing me down since Blake and his crew arrived started to burn off like morning fog under a relentless desert sun, leaving a stark, arid landscape behind. In its place, something else began to rise. It was a feeling I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. It was a cold, hard, metallic feeling in the pit of my stomach, a familiar sensation from my past. I started to chuckle. It began as a low rumble in my chest, a deep, guttural sound, and slowly, inexorably, it grew until I was laughing out loud in the empty room, a dry, jagged, humorless sound that scraped against my vocal cords. The neighbor in the next room, annoyed by the sudden eruption, banged on the wall, yelling at me to shut up. I didn't care. I couldn't care less. They thought I was just a nice old man. They thought I was Art, the kindly gardener. Art, the retired grandfather who liked crossword puzzles and sunsets. They forgot who I was before I met Eleanor, before her gentle love softened my edges, before I chose a peaceful life over ruthless ambition. They forgot who I was in the 90s, back then, on the commercial real estate circuit in Los Angeles. Nobody called me nice. They called me the maestro, a silent, calculating force. They called me the Barracuda. I ate developers for breakfast. I could spot a loophole in a contract from across a crowded room, a hidden trap that could dismantle an empire. I built my empire on distress sales, on hostile takeovers, on the meticulous exploitation of others' oversights. I had retired. I had softened. I had put the sword away because Eleanor wanted a peaceful life, a life free from the constant skirmishes and the cutthroat machinations. She wanted me to be a father, not a shark, so I became one. I let the armor rust. I let the instincts dull. I allowed myself to be soft because I thought I was safe, truly safe, among family. But the shark wasn't dead. He was just sleeping, and Scarlett, with her carefully crafted email, and Blake, with his callous disregard, had just thrown a bucket of chum into the water. The scent of blood was rousing the beast. I picked up the phone again, my hands steady, my resolve firm. I didn't call my brother to explain, to plead my sanity against Scarlett's insidious lies. I didn't call my cousins to lament my fate. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't called for business in 15 years, a number that belonged to a man who understood the dark arts of law. It rang 4 times before a gruff, gravelly voice, laced with the unmistakable timbre of age and too many late nights, answered. "Finch, here. Who is this?" "It's 3 in the afternoon, Art. You usually call on Sundays for our weekly chess game." "Jem," I said. My voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was steady, resonant, and imbued with the chilling authority I used to wield when I was closing a $50 million deal, when fortunes hung in the balance. "I need you to wake up. We have a situation, a serious one." Jem chuckled, a dry, wheezing sound. "Did you catch a big fish, Art? Or did you finally decide to sell that old sailboat of yours?" "I sold nothing, Jem," I replied, my voice edged with a cold, hard finality. "But my daughter did. She sold the Laguna Beach house. She transferred the title, closed the deal, and kicked me out onto the street. She thinks she walked away with $8 million. There was a profound silence on the other end of the line. A sudden, stunned quiet. Then the distinct sound of a chair squeaking as Jem sat bolt upright, every atom of his brilliant legal mind suddenly alert. "She sold the house? The time structure asterisk?" "Yes," I said, my gaze sweeping across the peeling paint on the motel wall, the irony of my situation not lost on me. "She sold the structure. Olympus Realty Holdings bought it. They're bulldozing it tomorrow morning to make way for their hideous, oversized McMansion development. Standard practice for those vultures." Jem let out a low, almost imperceptible whistle, a sound of grim acknowledgement. "Olympus, eh? They're nasty. But Art, does she know? Does the buyer know?" "No one knows," I said, a cruel, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. Scarlett never read the fine print. She was too busy picking out handbags and planning Instagram posts. And the buyer? Olympus Realty? They probably did a standard title search on the structure, not the underlying land. They missed the Sentinel Land Trusts LLC filing. They missed it entirely. "Art," Jem said, his voice dropping to a whisper, filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "If the ground lease expires without renewal—" "It expires tonight, Jem," I interrupted, my voice sharp, precise. "At midnight, 12 hours from now." I could hear Jem breathing heavily on the other end. A shallow, rapid intake of air. I could almost hear the intricate gears turning in his brilliant legal mind, processing the implications, the seismic shift this revelation represented. "So, what do you want to do?" he asked, his voice now controlled, focused. "Do you want to stop the sale? Do we file an injunction? It's not too late, technically, though it'll be messy." "No," I said, my answer immediate, unwavering. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dirty parking lot, the endless stream of cars, a world I no longer recognized. I don't want to stop it. I want her to feel it. I want her to spend the money. I want her to think she has won. Let the wire transfer clear. Let her board that plane to Paris. Let her believe she has escaped. "But Art," Jem warned, his voice laced with genuine concern, "this is nuclear. If we play this card, there is no going back. She will face criminal charges. Olympus Realty will sue her for fraud. She will lose everything. Her reputation, her freedom, her very future. It's a scorched earth strategy, Art." I looked at the reflection of my face in the darkened motel window. I looked old, yes. I looked tired, the lines etched deep by a lifetime of battles and recent betrayals. But in my eyes, I saw the fire. I saw the man who had survived market crashes and boardroom coups, who had built an empire from sheer force of will. And I saw the father who had just been declared insane by his own child, whose wife's memory had been thrown in the trash. She threw Eleanor's picture in the trash. "Jem," I said softly, the quiet words carrying more weight than any shout. "She left me in a Ponderosa inn, a place where dreams go to die, while she luxuriates. She declared war. I am just finishing it. Dust off the files. Meet me at the Salty Dog Diner on Pacific Coast Highway in an hour. Bring the deed. Bring the LLC papers. And Jem? Yeah, Art? Bring the good scotch. We have a long night ahead of us. Protocol Phoenix is active." I hung up the phone. The tremor was gone. The victim was gone. I wasn't Art Pendleton, the heartbroken old man anymore. I was Arthur Pendleton, the maestro, the landlord, and rent was due. And tonight, the collection was going to be brutal. The neon sign above the entrance to the Salty Dog Diner buzzed with a dying flicker, the word open sputtering in faded red letters, a defiant ghost against the encroaching night. I pushed open the heavy glass door, and was immediately enveloped by a comforting, almost nostalgic scent, a thick, layered mixture of burnt coffee, sizzling bacon grease that had been accumulating since the Reagan administration, and the faint, sweet aroma of stale apple pie. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow, where people went to be forgotten, to drown their sorrows in endless refills of weak coffee and greasy comfort food, which, I realized with a grim twist of irony, made it the perfect headquarters for a ghost, a man erased from his own life. I scanned the worn booths in the back, my gaze cutting through the hazy, fluorescent-lit gloom until I saw him. Jeremiah Jem Finch. He was wearing a rumpled linen suit that looked like he'd slept in it for a week, his tie askew, but his eyes, behind the thick spectacles, were as sharp and unyielding as shards of flint, betraying the intellectual powerhouse beneath the disheveled exterior. He was hunched over a plate of untouched, limp fries, reviewing a stack of documents I had faxed him from the motel office, his long, bony fingers tracing the lines of legal jargon with an almost surgical precision. I slid into the booth opposite him. The cracked vinyl seat sighed under my weight, pinching my leg with a familiar, uncomfortable sensation. Jem didn't look up immediately. He just kept reading, his brow furrowed in concentration, his finger tracing the intricate lines of the property transfer I had signed for Scarlett 10 years ago. Finally, with a decisive snap, he slammed the folder shut and looked at me. His face, a map of wrinkles etched deep by 40 years of navigating the shark-infested waters of corporate law, was grim, almost furious. "Art," he growled, his voice low, dangerous, a barely suppressed rumble. "I have seen some cold-blooded maneuvers in my time. I defended corporate raiders in the 80s, men who devoured companies whole and spit out the bones. But this is biblical. Your own flesh and blood." I signaled the harried waitress for coffee, a seasoned veteran of countless late-night shifts, her uniform stained with the battle scars of spilled condiments. "Just black, please," I said. I looked back at Jem, my expression unyielding. "Save the moral outrage for Sunday school, Jem. I need the legal reality. Give it to me straight. No embellishments, no sentimentality." Jem sighed, rubbing his temples with a hand that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 legal battles. "The legal reality is bleak, my friend. On the surface, the transfer of the structure to Scarlett was valid. You signed the deed. It's recorded in the Orange County Registry. She holds the title to the improvements on the land. Technically, under California law, she has every right to sell the building. If she found a buyer willing to close in 24 hours, she can sign the papers, accept the funds. The sheriff won't touch this. They'll call it a civil matter, a familial dispute, messy but not criminal. Not yet." I nodded slowly, taking a moment to absorb his words. I expected that. It's exactly what any cursory title search would reveal to an eager, rushed buyer. But you and I both know, Jem, the devil is always in the details, and the details don't add up, not for a shrewd buyer like Olympus Realty. Not for a family who should know better. "What do you mean?" Jem asked, leaning in, his sharp eyes narrowing with renewed focus. The puzzle was beginning to intrigue the lawyer in him, overriding the friend. I leaned forward, lowering my voice, ensuring only he could hear. "Think about it, Jem. That house, our home, was appraised at $12 million just last year. The market in Laguna Beach, especially for cliffside properties, is red hot. If she listed it properly, hired a decent broker, she could have ignited a bidding war. She could have walked away with 14, maybe even $15 million in a month, easily. But she didn't. She sold it off-market, under the radar, to Olympus Realty for $8 million. $8 million. Jem, that's a fire sale. An absolute steal." Jem's eyes widened slightly, the implications sinking in. $8 million? That's 60 cents on the dollar. That's not just a fire sale, Art. That's a liquidation, a forced surrender. No one sells prime Laguna Beach real estate at that kind of discount unless they have a gun to their head. Exactly, I said, a grim satisfaction in my voice. Someone is holding a gun to them, Jem. It might not be a physical gun, but it's lethal, it's immediate, and it's undeniable. They didn't just want the money. They needed times it. Yesterday. Desperately. Jem tapped his fingers on the worn formica table, his mind already racing, piecing together the fragmented clues. Debts. Massive ones. Massive ones, I confirmed, the bitterness returning. Blake is a third-rate real estate broker who drives a leased Bentley he can't afford. Scarlett hasn't worked a day in her life but wears couture and travels like she owns a private jet. The math never worked. For years, I subsidized the gap, covered their lavish lifestyle, unknowingly enabling their recklessness. Now that I've stopped, the dam has broken. I need to know exactly who they owe and how much. Every single dark corner of their financial lives. Jem pulled a small, dog-eared notepad from his inside jacket pocket, a tool from a bygone era of lawyering. I can run a credit check, look for liens, judgments. Not deep enough, I interrupted, shaking my head. Credit checks show what's legal, what's public record. I think this goes deeper, Jem. I think we're talking about bookies, loan sharks, or maybe something far worse. I need Marcus. Jem froze, his hand mid-air, pen hovering over the notepad. Marcus? Art? You haven't used Marcus since the hostile takeover of the Omni building in '98. That guy, he scares me, Art. He scares everyone, I said calmly, taking a slow, steady sip of the diner coffee, its bitter taste a welcome jolt to my senses. That's why he's expensive, and that's why he's effective. Call him. Tell him I have a job. I want a full forensic audit of Scarlett and Blake's lives. I want to know where they eat, who they talk to, every dirty secret, every hidden liability, and most importantly, where every single penny of that $8 million is going the second it hits their account. I want real-time tracking, a full financial autopsy. Jem looked at me for a long, searching moment. He didn't see the broken old man who had been kicked out of his home anymore. He saw the partner he used to fear, the ruthless strategist known as the Maestro. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He asked softly, a hint of accusation in his voice. I took another sip of the diner coffee. It tasted like battery acid, but it woke me up, cleared the mental fog. I'm not enjoying it, Jem. I'm executing a strategy. They wanted to play a game of Monopoly with me. They forgot I own the bank and the land. I will not be a victim. I will be the architect of their downfall. 20 minutes later, the door to the Salty Dog Diner opened again, admitting a man who seemed to belong nowhere and everywhere at the same time. He was of average height, average build, wearing a nondescript gray hoodie and faded jeans. He had a face you would forget 5 seconds after seeing it, a chameleon-like quality that was, in fact, his greatest superpower. This was Marcus M.J. Jones, the ghost in the machine, the master of information. M.J. slid into the booth next to Jem without a word, his movements fluid and silent. He placed a small, sleek black device on the table. It hummed for a second, emitting a soft, almost imperceptible frequency, effectively jamming any potential listening devices. Mr. Pendleton, M.J., said, his voice flat, professional, utterly devoid of inflection. It has been a long time. Jem says you have a family problem. It's a financial problem, Marcus, I corrected him, my gaze unwavering. My daughter and son-in-law just liquidated a $12 million asset for $8 million cash. I want to know why. Every dirty detail. M.J. nodded, pulling out a slim tablet, his fingers already dancing across the screen with practiced ease. I already started running preliminary checks on the way over. Your son-in-law, Blake Shaw. He has an interesting digital footprint, or rather, the concerning lack of one. He has 3 maxed-out credit cards, but he's also moving money through some crypto exchanges that are flagged for high risk, known for their lack of transparency. And your daughter, Scarlett, she's signed up for 3 different multi-level marketing schemes in the last year. She's hemorrhaging cash, desperately trying to maintain appearances, buying into her own illusions. That's the surface, I said, leaning back against the cracked vinyl, my eyes never leaving MJ. Impassive face. Dig deeper. I want to know who is squeezing them. Check for gambling debts. Blake likes sports a little too much. And check Scarlett's social circles. She's desperate to keep up appearances, to project an image of success she doesn't possess. Find the cracks, Marcus. Find the pressure points. I can have a full report in 12 hours, MJ said, his gaze meeting mine, utterly unflinching. It will cost you. My rates have gone up since '98. I reached into my tweed jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. It contained $5,000 in crisp $100 bills. My emergency fund, money I'd kept tucked away in the lining of my suitcase for years, a small reserve for the unexpected. Start with this. There's more when you bring me the smoking gun, the definitive proof. M.J. took the envelope, and with a movement so practiced it was almost invisible, made it disappear into the folds of his hoodie. Consider it done. One question, Mr. Pendleton. If I find something criminal, something that warrants police involvement, do you want me to go to the authorities? I looked him dead in the eye, my gaze unwavering. No, bring it to me. I am the judge and the jury on this one, Marcus. The police are for people who need protection. I don't need protection. I need ammunition. I need the unvarnished truth. M.J. nodded, a flicker of something akin to respect, or perhaps just professional understanding, crossing his bland face. He stood up and walked out as quietly and as unobtrusively as he had arrived, a shadow disappearing into the night. Jem let out a long breath he seemed to have been holding, the sound a low hiss. You are playing a dangerous game, Art. If they're mixed up with bad people, you're bringing those bad people right to our doorstep. They brought the bad people to my time's doorstep, Jem, I said, finishing my bitter coffee, the taste a premonition of what was to come. They sold my sanctuary, Eleanor's home, to pay for their sins. Now I am going to find out exactly what those sins are, and then I am going to use them to bury them. Every single one. I stood up, threw a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. A generous tip. Let's go back to your office, Jem. We have a contract to review. Protocol Phoenix needs to be airtight by midnight. We need to be ready. Jem gathered his papers, looking at me with a complex mix of worry, trepidation, and a grudging admiration. You know, he said as we walked to the door, the bell above tinkling merrily as we exited the diner. For a minute there, I almost forgot you were 72. I pushed open the door, stepping out into the harsh, unforgiving afternoon sunlight, the noise of the Pacific Coast Highway, a sudden assault on my ears. Age is just a number, Jem, I replied, my voice carrying a chilling resolve. Experience is a weapon, and I am fully loaded. I intend to use every single round. 24 hours later, the knock on my Ponderosa Inn motel room door was precise. 3 sharp, distinct raps, spaced perfectly apart. It was Marcus Jones. I opened the door and let him in. He brought with him the faint, earthy smell of impending rain and a thick manila envelope that looked heavy enough to break the cheap laminate table. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He didn't bother to look around at the peeling wallpaper, the stained carpet, or the general air of neglect. He just walked directly to the small circular table near the window, moved my cold, forgotten cup of instant coffee aside, and dropped the envelope precisely in the center. The sound it made hitting the wood was dull and flat, like a shovel hitting fresh earth, a premonition of a grave. I sat down opposite him. I didn't open it immediately. I looked at Marcus. His face was utterly unreadable, a blank canvas of professional detachment, but there was something in his eyes. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was the look a seasoned doctor gives a patient before delivering a terminal diagnosis. It was the look of a man who had seen the bottom of the abyss, and who knew, with chilling certainty, that I was about to look into it, too. It's worse than we thought, Mr. Pendleton, Marcus said quietly, his voice a low monotone, devoid of emotion. Much worse. You were right about the facade, about the glossy veneer they present to the world. But the structural rot underneath it is catastrophic. It's an unsustainable fiction. I reached out and untied the string on the envelope, my hands surprisingly steady. I had spent the last day steeling myself for betrayal, preparing my heart and mind for the inevitable disappointment that comes with familial treachery. But I wasn't entirely prepared for the sheer scale of the incompetence, the breathtaking recklessness, the profound depths of their financial self-destruction. I slid the thick stack of papers out. The first thing that caught my eye was a glossy printout of my daughter Scarlett's Instagram page. It was a carefully curated collage of manufactured perfection. Scarlett posing languidly on a yacht in the Aegean Sea, a shimmering cocktail in her hand. Scarlett holding a glass of vintage champagne in a private jet. The crisp white interior, a testament to her fabricated wealth. Blake, my son-in-law, leaning casually against a rented Lamborghini in front of a Malibu mansion that wasn't his, with a caption about grinding hard and hustling to achieve the life you deserve. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. Marcus reached over and, with a silent, efficient gesture, flipped the page. Behind the glossy, aspirational photos were bank statements, a stark and brutal reality check, and they were bleeding red. "Your daughter and son-in-law are not rich. Art," Marcus said, his voice flat, clinical. "They are destitute. In fact, they are worse than destitute. They are drowning in a sea of negative equity that is so deep, so vast. I'm surprised they haven't been arrested for financial malfeasance yet. They are a ticking time bomb of debt." I put on my reading glasses, the cheap plastic frames a symbol of my current reality, and began to read the numbers, a grim ledger of their downfall. The first section was dedicated to Blake. I had always known my son-in-law was, at best, a mediocre real estate broker, a man who coasted on charm and superficiality. But I had, perhaps naively, assumed he made a decent, if unspectacular, living. I was wrong. The report detailed a secret, shadow life, a clandestine existence fueled by desperation and delusion that I never suspected, never glimpsed behind the designer suits and the leased luxury cars. Blake wasn't just a bad businessman. He was a compulsive gambler, and a spectacularly bad one at that. According to Marcus's meticulous findings, Blake had lost over $2 million in the last 18 months alone. It started, innocently enough, with online sports betting, a seemingly harmless pastime. He was betting on everything from NFL games to obscure European soccer leagues, chasing the thrill, the elusive big win. But when the losses started piling up, quickly, relentlessly, he tried to chase them, a gambler's fatal flaw. He leveraged everything he could, taking out unsecured loans, maxing out credit lines, pouring money into speculative cryptocurrency schemes that promised 1,000% returns, the siren song of instant wealth. He bought at the peak and sold at the bottom, over and over again, a repeating pattern of self-sabotage. He was hemorrhaging cash into digital wallets that turned out to be either outright scams or simply monumentally bad investments, fueled by pure, unadulterated FOMO. But that wasn't the scariest part. The truly terrifying part was where he got the money to fuel his ever-escalating gambling addiction. He had maxed out 6 different credit cards, their limits stretched beyond recognition. He had taken out personal loans from predatory online lenders with interest rates that should, by any moral and legal standard, be illegal, usurious rates that chained borrowers to an endless cycle of debt. And when those legitimate, albeit unethical, avenues dried up, when the banks shut him off, he went to the streets. Marcus pointed to a name highlighted in stark yellow on a transaction list, a chilling testament to Blake's desperation. "Vinny, the Knuckles?" I asked, reading the ominous nickname scrolled next to a series of large, unexplained cash withdrawals, a name that conjured images of dark alleys and broken bones. "Close," Marcus said, his voice clipped. "That's a shell company for a local loan shark operation, run out of a nondescript warehouse in downtown Los Angeles. They specialize in high-interest, short-term, physically enforced debt collection. Blake owes them $500,000, and they are not the kind of people who send polite late notices in the mail. They send guys with baseball bats, guys who break kneecaps. They gave him a deadline, Mr. Pendleton, 48 hours. That deadline expires tomorrow at noon." I felt a cold chill run down my spine, an icy tendril of dread. Tomorrow at noon. The same time Olympus Realty was scheduled to bulldoze my house. The timing wasn't a coincidence. It was a desperate, last-ditch survival mechanism. Blake wasn't selling my house to get rich. He was selling it to save his life, to buy back his kneecaps. I turned the page, my gaze shifting to Scarlett's section. A faint, lingering hope, perhaps naive, that my daughter was merely a victim here, an innocent wife dragged down by a reckless, gambling-addicted husband. But the paper in front of me told a different story, a far more complex and ultimately tragic tale, a story of vanity, delusion, and an insatiable hunger for admiration. Scarlett owed a staggering $1.5 million, but she didn't lose it on gambling. She lost it trying to buy admiration, to purchase a social standing that was utterly beyond her means, to project an image of effortless success. She had gotten deeply involved in a multi-level marketing scheme, peddling high-end luxury cosmetics. She branded herself with aggressive online marketing as a CEO, a boss babe, a self-made entrepreneur conquering the beauty industry. But the business model, as Marcus's report meticulously detailed, was a classic pyramid. To keep her rank, to maintain the outward appearance of success, of upward mobility, she had to constantly buy inventory. Her spacious two-car garage, a rented storage unit 3 towns over in Costa Mesa, and even the guest room of their penthouse apartment were all crammed floor to ceiling with boxes of unsellable face cream, overpriced serums, and garish lipstick shades. She had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars not selling product to customers, but buying her own Times product, just to post inflated screenshots of her sales numbers online, a desperate performance for her followers. And the lifestyle? The designer clothes, the extravagant trips, the lavish dinners at exclusive Newport Beach restaurants, the constant updates to her social media feed, it was all charged. Every single penny. She had 5 different platinum cards, all of them maxed out, rotating balances, robbing Peter to pay Paul, a frantic juggling act designed to keep the plates spinning just long enough to take the next perfect selfie, to capture the next moment of fabricated opulence. But wait, I said, looking up at Marcus, my voice betraying my surprise. What about their apartment? The penthouse in Santa Monica? They always bragged about the view, the exclusive address. Marcus flipped to the next page, revealing a stark, official-looking document. It was an eviction notice. They don't own it, Art. They rent it, $25,000 a month, and they haven't paid rent in 4 months. The landlord started eviction proceedings last week. They're days away from being locked out, having their possessions thrown onto the street. That's why they needed to move to Europe, I whispered, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. It wasn't a sabbatical, it was an escape. They were fleeing the country, running away before the lawsuits, the creditors, and the eviction notices caught up with them, before their meticulously constructed house of cards collapsed entirely. I sat back in the cheap motel chair, the papers sliding through my fingers, feeling a profound weariness settle over me. It was a house of cards, a fragile, pathetic structure built on ego, delusion, and a mountain of lies. And I, Arthur Pendleton, Eleanor's husband, Scarlett's father, was the foundation they had decided to rip out, to dismantle, just to keep it standing for one more pathetic, fleeting day. Now, look at the sale of your house, Marcus said, his finger tapping the final document in the file, a grim crescendo to his findings. This is the smoking gun, Art. This is where the fraud, intentional or otherwise, begins. I looked at the contract. The purchase price was indeed $8 million. The buyer, Olympus Realty Holdings. I knew Olympus. They were indeed vultures, a conglomerate specializing in distressed assets, in turning others' misfortunes into profit. They didn't buy homes. They bought desperation. They bought problems and then solved them, usually by demolition and redevelopment. Your house appraised for $12 million last month, Marcus reiterated, his voice a hammer striking a nail. In this market, with a well-managed bidding war, you could have easily gotten 14, maybe even 15, but Scarlett sold it for 8. Why? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Because she needed the money fast, Marcus confirmed. Exactly. A traditional sale, even a rushed one, takes 30 to 60 days. Inspections, escrow, financing approvals, contingencies, legal reviews. Scarlett and Blake didn't have 60 days. They didn't have 6 days. They had, effectively, 48 hours before Vinny the Knuckles broke Blake's legs and the landlord changed the locks on their penthouse. Olympus Realty offered them a deal. $8 million cash wire transfer in 24 hours. No inspections, no questions asked, no drawn-out escrow. A fire sale, indeed. A very hot fire sale. I closed my eyes. The image was crystal clear now, stark and brutal in its clarity. They didn't just sell my house, they slaughtered it. They took a lifetime of hard work, a legacy I intended to leave to them, the fruits of my entire life's labor, and they sold it for pennies on the dollar, just to cover their own breathtaking incompetence, their own catastrophic recklessness. They burned down the family farm to warm their hands for a single, desperate night. They are not investing the money for your care, Art, Marcus said softly, his voice imbued with a rare hint of compassion. They are not putting it in a trust. The moment that $8 million hits their account, $4 million is gone immediately. To pay off the sharks, to pay off the banks, to cover the penthouse rent. The rest, they will blow it in Europe, desperately trying to maintain the illusion that they are winners, that they are living the life they always deserved. They sacrificed you, Art. They sacrificed their father, Eleanor's husband, to save their crumbling reputation, to buy themselves a few more weeks of freedom. I opened my eyes. The sadness was gone, completely, utterly eradicated. It was replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a diamond cutting glass, a cold, precise surgical blade. They viewed me as a resource, an asset to be liquidated. I wasn't their father. I was just inventory. They were willing to make me homeless, to strip me of my dignity, to discard Eleanor's cherished memories, to declare me senile and irrelevant, all so they didn't have to admit to the world, or to themselves, that they were monumental failures. They were selling my blood to pay for their champagne. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice steady, betraying no emotion. "You have done excellent work, as always." "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked, his professional detachment returning. "We can take this to the police. This is elder abuse. This is fraud, clear as day. We can freeze the assets immediately. It's not too late for that." I shook my head slowly. "No police, not yet. If I freeze the assets now, the deal falls through. Olympus pulls out. The money stops. And if the money stops, Blake's creditors, Vinny, the Knuckles, and his friends, come for him. I don't want them to get off that easy. I don't want them to be victims of a bad deal. I want them to be the architects of their own utter, complete destruction." I looked at the cheap plastic clock on the motel room wall. It was 5:00 the afternoon. The wire transfer would have cleared by now. They would be celebrating, toasting their cleverness, popping bottles of expensive champagne, convinced they had pulled off the heist of the century. They thought they were the smartest people in the room, the cunning opportunists. "They are going to think they won," I said, standing up, the weariness having vanished, replaced by a coiled tension, a lethal energy. "I want them to feel that victory. I want them to taste it. I want them to spend that money in their heads 1,000 times over, to book the trips, to buy the cars, to imagine the life they so desperately crave. Because when I pull the rug out from under them, Marcus, the fall needs to be high enough to break them completely, utterly, irrevocably broken." I gathered the papers and put them back into the thick manila envelope, tying the string with deliberate care. Marcus stood up, sensing the profound shift in the room, the transition from investigation to execution. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the brutal path I had chosen, the war I was about to wage. "Go home, Marcus," I said. "Send your invoice to Jem Finch, and keep your phone on. I might need you tomorrow morning. Very early." Marcus left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving me alone once more in the motel room. But the room didn't feel small anymore. It felt like a war room, a command center from which I would orchestrate their downfall. I walked over to the mirror and looked at myself. I didn't see a victim. I saw a man who had just been given the ultimate weapon, perfect, irrefutable information. They sold the house for $8 million. They owed $4 million. That meant they had $4 million left to play with, to squander on their delusions. But they forgot one thing. They forgot about the land. They forgot about the ground lease. And they forgot that tomorrow morning, at precisely 8 a.m., I wasn't just going to be an evicted old man. I was going to be the landlord, the true owner of the very earth upon which their dreams were built. And I was going to collect, with extreme prejudice. I picked up my phone and dialed Jem. "It's time," I said, the moment he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "They sold it. The money is gone. Prepare the paperwork. We are going to the site tomorrow morning. And Jem, call the sheriff. I want a witness when I take back what is mine, down to the last molecule of dirt." The valet at the Azure Coast Bistro in Newport Beach, a sleek, impossibly young man with perfectly coiffed hair, sneered at me when I pulled up to the curb. I wasn't driving my vintage Mercedes tonight, the one Eleanor and I had polished on Sunday mornings. I was behind the wheel of a dented, beige Ford Taurus, a loaner from Marcus that smelled faintly of wet dog and stale French fries, blending into the background like urban camouflage, a ghost of a car for a ghost of a man. I didn't hand the keys to the supercilious valet. Instead, I parked down the street, sandwiched between a delivery truck and a perpetually dripping fire hydrant, watching the illuminated entrance of the restaurant through the windshield like a sniper waiting for a target, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. It was precisely 8:00 the evening, the air thick and heavy with the cloying scent of night-blooming jasmine, exhaust fumes from impossibly expensive cars, and the faint, salty tang of the distant ocean. I pulled the bill of my faded Dodgers baseball cap lower over my eyes, obscuring my features. I was wearing a stained windbreaker Eleanor had bought me decades ago and reading glasses I'd picked up at a gas station for $5. To the world passing by, the glittering procession of wealth and youth, I was utterly invisible. I was just another old man down on his luck, perhaps waiting for a bus that would never come, or maybe just lost in a city that worshipped money and beauty with a fervent, almost religious zeal. But inside the car, on the passenger seat, sat a small, black case Marcus had left for me. It looked innocuous, like a laptop bag, but inside was a directional laser microphone, the kind of sophisticated equipment usually reserved for high-stakes corporate espionage or sensitive private investigations. It was the ears I needed, the conduit to their hubris. I watched as a gleaming white stretch limousine, absurdly long and ostentatious, pulled up to the valet stand, its polished chrome glinting under the restaurant's spotlights. The door opened with a soft, almost theatrical sigh, and out stepped Blake. He was wearing a white dinner jacket that, despite its expense, made him look like a waiter at a particularly bad casino, trying too hard to impress. And he was laughing, a loud, booming sound, his head thrown back, basking in the flash of the restaurant's ambient lighting, soaking up the attention he so craved. Scarlett followed him, looking radiant, almost ethereal, in a shimmering silver dress that I knew, with grim certainty, she couldn't afford. She was holding a magnum bottle of champagne, waving it at the small entourage of hangers-on, the sycophants who spilled out of the limo behind them. These were their friends, the parasites, the people who were there for the good times, who would vanish into thin air the second the credit card was declined, the well of money ran dry. They didn't go inside immediately. Instead, they gravitated towards the expansive outdoor patio, immediately occupying the prime VIP table near the low glass partition that separated the diners from the street. It was perfect. They wanted to be seen. They wanted the world to know they had arrived, that they had conquered. Their vanity, their insatiable need for external validation, was their greatest vulnerability. I rolled down the window just an inch, barely enough for air to escape. I opened the black case and aimed the receiver at their table, a silent, unseen weapon. I placed the earpiece in my left ear. The static hissed for a second, a white noise that sounded eerily like the ocean I missed so dearly, before clearing up into crystal clear, high-definition audio. It was as if I was sitting right next to them, privy to their every word, their every arrogant laugh. "I ordered the Wagyu," Blake's voice boomed through the earpiece, distorted slightly by the clinking of glasses and the rising swell of excited chatter. "And keep the Dom Perignon coming, boys. We're celebrating. We just closed the deal of the century." One of his friends, a man I recognized as a fellow failed crypto investor named Kyle, slapped Blake heartily on the back, a loud, celebratory thwack. "So, the old man finally caved, huh? I thought you said he was stubborn. A real hard case." Blake laughed. A harsh, grating sound, and the sound made my grip on the steering wheel tighten until my knuckles turned white, the pain a welcome distraction from the betrayal. "Stubborn? No, Kyle. He's stupid. That's the difference. The guy spent 30 years thinking he was some kind of business genius, a real maestro or whatever. But in the end, I rolled him like a cheap rug. I walked into his house, snapped my fingers, and he packed his bags. Didn't even read the eviction notice properly. He just folded. Pathetic, really. I listened, my breath shallow, my heart a cold stone in my chest. I wanted to hear this. I needed times to hear this. I needed to know exactly what they thought of me. To strip away any lingering illusions, any shred of doubt. Scarlett chimed in, her voice slurring slightly, betraying the effects of too much celebratory champagne. "You should have seen him, guys. It was pathetic. He was holding on to this old picture of my mom like it was some holy relic, a piece of ancient history. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But then I remembered the $8 million hitting our account tomorrow, and I got over it pretty fast. Just like that." She snapped her fingers dramatically. Laughter erupted around the table, a cruel, hyena-like sound that seemed to mock the very concept of human decency. "A toast," Blake shouted, raising his glass high, the crystal clinking with the force of his enthusiasm. "To Art Pendleton, the most generous, clueless benefactor in the history of Laguna Beach. May he enjoy his stay at the Ponderosa Inn while we enjoy Europe." "To Art," the group chorused, their voices a triumphant, drunken symphony of avarice. I closed my eyes. The pain was physical, a sharp, searing knife twisting in my gut. I had changed Scarlett's diapers. I had paid for her braces, her college education, her first apartment. I had held her hand when she got her heart broken for the first time, when the world seemed too cruel. I had built that house, that sanctuary, to be her sanctuary, a place where she would always, always feel safe, loved, and protected. And now she was toasting to my homelessness, my destruction, while wearing a dress bought with the very promise of my downfall. "So, what's the plan?" Kyle asked, digging into a towering seafood platter, oblivious to the emotional carnage unfolding just yards away. "What are you buying first?" Blake leaned back in his chair, putting his expensive loafers up on the empty chair next to him, an air of supreme confidence about him. "First, we pay off the annoying little debts. Get the sharks off our backs. That's just housekeeping, a necessary evil. But then, tomorrow morning, before we head to the airport, I'm stopping at the Ferrari dealership in Santa Monica. I have my eye on an F8 Tributo, red convertible. I want to drive it to the terminal, make an entrance." "A Ferrari!" Scarlett giggled, her voice high-pitched and slightly shrill. "You're terrible, Blake. I'm just going to upgrade our flight to a private charter. I absolutely cannot deal with commercial, even first class. It's so crowded, so common." Her words, dripping with disdain for anything less than extravagant, were a fresh wound. "And when we get to Paris, I'm buying that Hermes Birkin bag I've been looking at, the one that costs more than a new Honda Civic. It's an investment, really." They continued to plan their spending spree, dissecting my legacy dollar by dollar, reveling in their newfound, albeit fleeting, wealth. They talked about my house not as a home, not as a repository of cherished memories, but as a carcass they had stripped for meat, a resource to be plundered. They mocked my clothes. They mocked my old car. They even mocked the way I drank my coffee, finding fault in every small detail of my existence. They stripped away every layer of respect a child should have for a parent, leaving nothing but naked greed and cold contempt. And then Scarlett said something that froze the blood in my veins, a statement so utterly devoid of humanity it made my stomach lurch. "You know," she said, her voice dropping lower, conspiratorial, as if sharing a delicious secret. The best part is, he thinks he's going to a nursing home eventually. He thinks we're setting up a trust, arranging for his care. But once we leave the country, once we're safely in Europe, he's on his own. If he runs out of money at that motel, he can go to a shelter for all I care. I'm done pretending to care. He had his time. He lived a good life. Now it's our turn. If he dies alone in some state facility, well, that's just nature taking its course. Survival of the fittest, right? Silence followed her statement at the table. A brief, uncomfortable pause, but only for a second. Then Blake shrugged, a casual, dismissive gesture. Exactly, babe. Survival of the fittest, and we are most definitely the fittest. The old man was just an anchor weighing us down. I took the earpiece out of my ear. I didn't need to hear any more. I had heard enough. I sat there in the oppressive darkness of the Ford Taurus, staring at the glowing, opulent entrance of the Azure Coast Bistro, the symbol of their hollow triumph. I looked at the young valet, rushing to open doors for people who truly believed they owned the world, who lived in a gilded cage of their own making. I looked at my daughter, Scarlett, laughing, her head thrown back, completely unaware that the very ground beneath her feet was made of smoke, that her victory was an illusion. For the last 24 hours, a small, weak, foolish part of me had been clinging to a desperate hope, a hope for a sign, any sign, that I should show mercy, a sign that maybe, deep down, they were just desperate people making bad choices, driven by the terror of loan sharks and insurmountable debt. I had hoped that if I confronted them, if I exposed their lies, they might break down, apologize, beg for forgiveness, and that there was still some semblance of a family to save. But that hope died on the patio of the Azure Coast Bistro. It didn't just die. It was brutally murdered by a toast to my utter, complete destruction, to my planned abandonment. I looked at my hands. They were old hands, yes, spotted with the indelible marks of age and experience. But they were strong. These hands had built skyscrapers, metaphorically speaking. These hands had signed contracts that reshaped city blocks, that moved mountains of capital. And these hands had held my dying wife, Eleanor, promising her that I would take care of our daughter, that I would protect her, that I would ensure her future. And I was going to keep that promise. I was going to teach Scarlett the most valuable, and perhaps the most painful, lesson a parent can teach a child. I was going to teach her that actions have consequences. I was going to teach her that you cannot sell what you do not truly own, what is not genuinely yours to command. And I was going to teach her that you never, ever underestimate the man who built the castle you are living in, the man who laid the very foundation of your existence. I wasn't sad anymore. The grief had been cauterized by the white-hot heat of their cruelty, burned away to a hard, unflinching resolve. I felt calm. I felt focused. I felt like the Barracuda again. Sleek, dangerous, and utterly relentless. I picked up my burner phone, the cheap plastic device, a stark contrast to the power it wielded. I dialed Jem's number. He answered on the first ring, as if he had been sitting by the phone, waiting for me to break, waiting for my signal. "Art, are you okay? Did you find anything?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "I found everything, Jem," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, each word a cold, hard fact. "They aren't just spending the money. They are celebrating my demise. They are planning to leave me to rot in a state shelter while they fly private to Paris, laughing at my expense." "Jesus!" Jem breathed, the shock palpable in his voice. "I am so sorry. Art. Truly, deeply sorry." "Don't be," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "Clarity is a gift, Jem, even when it is painful. Listen to me carefully. I want you to execute Protocol Phoenix. Immediately." "Are you sure, Art?" Jem asked, his voice trembling slightly, acknowledging the enormity of what I was asking. "Once we file the notice of reversion, there is no going back. The deed snaps back to the LLC. The sale becomes void. The money they received becomes theft. They will go to prison, Art. Not just for fraud, but for grand larceny. For years." I looked through the windshield at Scarlett. She was taking another selfie with the champagne bottle, puckering her lips for the camera, her hair shimmering under the restaurant lights. She looked so happy. She looked so utterly victorious, so convinced of her escape. "Do it, Jem," I said. "File the papers electronically. Time-stamp it for 1 minute past midnight. Let them have their night. Let them have their champagne. Let them dream about Ferraris and private jets and designer handbags. But tomorrow morning, at precisely 8 a.m., I want the sheriff waiting for us at the property. Understood?" "Art," Jem started, his voice heavy, but he stopped himself, reconsidering. "What is it, Jem?" "Nothing," he said, his voice laced with a grim humor. "Just remind me never to cross you. Good night, Art." I hung up the phone and started the engine of the Taurus. It rumbled to life, a rough, unrefined sound that fit my mood perfectly. I took one last look at the patio. Blake was pouring another glass of vintage wine. Scarlett was laughing at something Kyle said, her head thrown back, radiating an aura of untouchable joy. They were the kings and queens of their make-believe world for exactly 4 more hours. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, merging into the glittering, indifferent traffic of Newport Beach. I drove back toward the highway, back toward my cheap motel room, toward the constant noise and the lingering smell of despair. But I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a hunter who had just set the perfect, inescapable trap. The clock was ticking. Midnight was coming. And when the bell tolled, the carriage wasn't just going to turn into a pumpkin. It was going to turn into a prison cell. "Enjoy the night, children," I whispered to the empty car, "because the sunrise is going to burn." I sat in the high-backed leather chair across from Jem's massive mahogany desk, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. The office, usually bustling with the quiet hum of legal work, was dimly lit, illuminated only by the focused glow of a green banker's lamp that cast long, dancing shadows across the walls, lined floor to ceiling with meticulously organized legal texts, their leather bindings gleaming faintly. It smelled of old paper, rich mahogany polish, and the faint, lingering scent of the single, expensive cigar Jem allowed himself once a year. This, I knew, was where the real work happened. Not in the bright, noisy courtrooms, filled with theatrical pronouncements and public spectacle, but in quiet, clandestine rooms like this, where the fine print was written, where destinies were sealed in ink, where the intricate dance of power was choreographed. Jem looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses, his brow furrowed deeply, a network of concern etched into his face. He held the yellowing document I had pulled from my safe deposit box earlier that day, a document that, to the untrained eye, might seem unremarkable, a mere formality. It was dated 15 years ago, back when Eleanor was first diagnosed with her illness, back when I was desperately trying to secure our family's future, not just against the tax man, but against the inherent uncertainties of life itself, against the caprice of fate. "You see, Jem," I said, my voice cutting through the hushed silence of the room, each word weighted with the gravity of the impending revelation. "They think they understand real estate because they watch renovation shows on HDTV. They think ownership is a simple, straightforward concept. You buy a house, you get a deed, you own it. Simple, clear. But you and I, we know better. We know that property rights are not a monolithic block. They are a bundle of sticks, a complex collection of divisible rights. And you can separate those sticks, lease them, control them, however you like, for whatever purpose you deem necessary." I leaned forward, tapping the aged document on the desk, the sound a soft, resonant thud. 15 years ago, when I ostensibly transferred the Laguna Beach property to Scarlett, I didn't give her the whole bundle. Not entirely. I gave her just enough to make her times feel times like an owner, to simplify the immediate tax implications and to pass on what I hoped would be a sense of responsibility and stewardship. But I kept the most important stick for myself, the linchpin, the ultimate control. I continued, a small, grim smile playing on my lips. I used a structure common in high-value commercial real estate in places like New York and London, but rarely seen, almost unheard of, in residential deals here on the West Coast. I split the estate into 2 distinct, legally separate entities. The first was the improvements. That's the physical structure of the house. The walls, the roof, the swimming pool, the new kitchen cabinets Blake was so proud of. That is what I deeded to Scarlett. It allowed us to bypass a massive reassessment for property taxes at the time. A significant financial advantage. She holds the title to the building. Yes, but the second entity, I continued, my voice dropping slightly, imbued with the quiet power of a man revealing a carefully guarded secret, is the land itself, the dirt, the sand, the prime oceanfront bedrock that the house sits on, the very foundation of its value. I never gave that to her. Not really. I transferred the land title to a shelf company I had created, a meticulously obscure entity called Sentinel Land Trusts, LLC, a company that, to this day, has exactly one shareholder. Me, Arthur Pendleton. Jem, who had been listening intently, his lawyer's mind already racing, flipped through the dense pages of the document, his eyes scanning the intricate legal jargon until he found what I was referring to. He stopped, his long, bony finger resting on a specific paragraph in the middle of page 42. Here it is, he whispered, reading aloud, his voice barely audible. Ground Lease Agreement. Lesser. Sentinel Land Trusts, LLC. Lessee. Scarlett Pendleton Shaw. Exactly, I said, a slow nod confirming his discovery. Scarlett didn't just get a house, Jem. She got a house subject to a ground lease. She owns the building, the structure, the improvements. But she pays rent to occupy the underlying land. Since I wanted to be a good father, a generous one, I set the rent at a symbolic $1 a year, payable on demand. I never demanded it, never collected it, so she simply forgot it existed. She probably never even read this document. Not truly. She was 23 at the time, far too busy planning her spring break trips and dreaming of a glamorous future to care about estate planning or legal minutiae. She just signed where the little sticky notes told her to sign, trusting her old man. But here's the kicker, Jem. I sat back, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the fine scotch Jem had brought, savoring its complex warmth. It burned pleasantly on the way down, a comforting counterpoint to the cold fire in my soul. A ground lease, like any contract, has a term. Usually, they're 99 years, especially in residential applications. That's standard, virtually granting ownership for life. But I didn't give her 99 years. I didn't trust her judgment, not entirely. Even back then, I had seen flickers of her entitlement, her materialistic streak. I gave her a 15-year term, with an option to renew that times to be exercised in writing 30 days before expiration. A very specific, very unambiguous clause. Jem looked at the date on the top of the contract. March 12th, 2005. He did the quick math in his head, his eyes widening with each passing second of calculation. He looked at the antique clock on the wall, then back at me, a silent, almost horrified realization dawning on his face. Art, he said, his voice dropping to an almost inaudible whisper. That's 15 years ago to the day, to the second. I correct it, I said, a grim satisfaction in my voice. The lease expires at midnight tonight, Pacific Standard Time. 1 minute past midnight, the ownership reverts. And since Scarlett was too busy selling the house out from under me to bother reading her own title report, I continued, pressing the point, and since Olympus Realty was too eager to close a cash deal in 24 hours to do deep-dive due diligence on the underlying land rights, to scrutinize the intricacies of California property law, nobody noticed. They missed the reversion clause, a critical oversight. Jem, a man who prided himself on meticulous legal scrutiny, flipped frantically to the end of the document, his finger scanning the pages until he found the pertinent section. Clause 17, he whispered, reading aloud, his voice laced with professional dread. Reversionary interest. Upon the expiration of this lease, if not renewed in writing by the lessee within the specified time frame, all improvements, structures, and fixtures located upon the said land shall revert immediately and automatically to the lessor, Sentinel Land Trusts, LLC, without compensation to the lessee. I stood up and walked to the panoramic window, looking out at the glittering, sprawling city lights of Los Angeles. A distant, sprawling tapestry of ambition and illusion. It's a beautiful piece of legal engineering, isn't it, Jem? At 12 o'clock tonight, Scarlett's ownership of the house evaporates. It vanishes into thin air. The house, the garage, the swimming pool, even the new kitchen cabinets Blake installed with such a flourish. It all legally becomes the property of Sentinel Land Trusts, LLC. It becomes mine. Once again, Jem took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, running a weary hand over his face. This is a trap, Art. A perfectly laid bear trap. You let them sell the house today, knowing, with absolute certainty, that tomorrow they wouldn't own it. You stood there, watched them loot your life, knowing the sword of Damocles was hanging over their heads, ready to fall. I didn't let them do anything, Jem, I said coldly, my voice devoid of emotion, a chilling pronouncement. They chose to do this. They chose to bypass the normal, legal sales process, to rush the deal, to cut corners, because they were desperate for money. If they had hired a competent lawyer, if they had done their due diligence, instead of rushing to get cash for their gambling debts and their insatiable desire for luxury, they would have found this. If they had treated me with an ounce of respect, if they had involved me in the decision, if they had sought my consent, I would have signed the renewal. I would have extended the lease. I would have let them have the money. But they didn't. They chose to be clever. They chose to be ruthless. They chose to be thieves. Jem looked at the file, then back up at me, his face etched with the chilling implications of my plan. So, Olympus Realty paid $8 million for a house that Scarlett only owned for another. He checked his watch, his eyes wide. 4 hours. When the sun comes up tomorrow, they will own a piece of paper that says they bought a house, but the house itself will belong to you. Scarlett sold them air, Art. She committed fraud, pure and simple, unintentional perhaps. Initially, I said, acknowledging the nuance, but fraud nonetheless. She represented that she had clear, marketable title to the property in perpetuity. She didn't. She sold an asset she was about to lose, an asset whose underlying rights were expiring. When Olympus Realty realizes they paid $8 million for a house they don't own, on land they don't control, they aren't going to sue me. I am just the landlord, enforcing my contract, a perfectly legal, meticulously drafted agreement. They are going to sue Scarlett, and they are going to go after her for fraud, for theft, for damages. They will go after her with the full force of their corporate legal team. Jem stood up, pacing the small, elegant room, his long strides reflecting his agitation. Art, do you realize what this means? If you let this happen, if you let that money clear and get spent, Scarlett is going to prison. Olympus is a shark, a far larger, more dangerous one than you ever were. They won't just want their money back. They will want blood. This is grand larceny on a massive scale, Art. Years in federal prison. I turned from the window to face him, my face shrouded in shadow, but my voice was clear, unwavering, imbued with a cold, hard finality. I know, Jem. You could stop it, Jem pressed, his voice urgent, pleading. We could call Olympus right now. We could send an emergency injunction. We could tell them the lease is expiring. They would stop the payment. The deal would be voided. Scarlett would still be broke. She would still be in debt, but she wouldn't be a felon. She wouldn't be facing 10 years in federal prison. Art, please, think about this. I looked at my old friend, my steadfast confidant. I saw the profound conflict in his eyes. He was a lawyer, yes, a man of law and order, but he was also a father himself. He was struggling with the raw, brutal savagery of what I was proposing. But he hadn't been there this morning. He hadn't seen Blake throw Eleanor's cherished picture into the trash. He hadn't heard Scarlett laugh about leaving me to rot in a state facility while she sipped champagne in Paris. No, I said, the single word hanging in the air like a guillotine blade, an irreversible decree. We do not warn them. We do not call Olympus. We do not call Scarlett. We let the clock run out. But Art, Jem started again, his voice cracking with emotion. I cut him off. They wanted the money, Jem. They were desperate for it. They sold their souls for it. I want them to have it. I want the money to hit their account. I want them to pay off Vinny the Knuckles and the loan sharks. I want them to pay off the credit cards. I want them to book the private jets and the 5-star hotels. I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel rich. I want them to climb all the way to the top of the mountain, thinking they have conquered the world, that they have outsmarted everyone, especially me. I walked back to the desk and picked up my glass of scotch, the warmth a sharp contrast to the coldness in my heart. Because the higher they climb, Jem, the harder the fall. If I stop this now, they just go back to being broke. They blame me for ruining their deal. They play the victim, but if I let this play out, they are the villains. They are the criminals. They did this to themselves. Every single step. I raised the glass in a mock toast, a silent, chilling ritual. Let the clock run out. Let the lease expire. Let them spend every single dime of that $8 million, every last cent, because tomorrow morning, when I show up with the sheriff to evict the new owners from my land, from my house, Scarlett is going to learn that the only thing more dangerous than a shark in the water is the man who built the tank, the man who truly owns the ocean itself. Jem looked at me for a long, heavy silence, his face a complex mixture of horror and grudging admiration. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he picked up his own glass. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just drank, draining the amber liquid in a single, decisive gulp. He knew there was no arguing with me. The verdict had been delivered. Protocol Phoenix was a go. The trap was set, meticulously and brutally, and the unsuspecting prey was already feasting on the bait, completely unaware that the steel jaws were about to snap shut, irrevocably. The almost imperceptible vibration of the phone on the cheap laminate table was the only sign that the execution, the slow, deliberate unraveling of Scarlett and Blake's carefully constructed world, had truly begun. It was 2:00 inches the afternoon, the harsh California sun still beating down mercilessly outside. I was sitting in my Ponderosa Inn motel room, the curtains drawn against the relentless glare, watching a relentless stream of data scroll across the tablet Marcus had left me. It was a live, unflinching mirror of my daughter's financial life, a real-time feed of the transactions that were meticulously sealing her fate, one irreversible debit at a time. Miles away, in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Los Angeles, a sterile, impersonal arena of high finance, Scarlett and Blake were sitting across from the steely-eyed lawyers of Olympus Realty Holdings. I could see the precise digital timestamp when the notary stamp hit the paper, an official punctuation mark on their act of betrayal. I could practically hear the scratch of the pen as Scarlett signed her name on the grant deed, formally transferring a property she would lose the legal rights to in less than 10 hours, a detail she, in her haste and arrogance, had completely overlooked. Then, the notification flashed green on the screen, a triumphant, almost celebratory digital burst. Wire transfer initiated, a pause, pending, and then, finally, complete. The balance in their joint checking account, which had been hovering precariously near zero for months, suddenly, spectacularly, exploded. $8 million, a glorious string of zeros that, to their deluded minds, must have looked like salvation, like the definitive end of all their problems. I closed my eyes and vividly imagined the scene, painted with agonizing clarity by Marcus's relentless data. I imagined Blake leaping out of his chair, a triumphant whoop escaping his lips, high-fiving the Olympus lawyers, acting like he had just brokered a peace treaty instead of selling his father-in-law's very blood, his home, his memories. I imagined Scarlett, tears of relief streaming down her perfectly made-up face, believing with every fiber of her being that the nightmare of debt collectors, loan sharks, and eviction notices was finally irrevocably over. They were probably shaking hands with the developers, laughing about how easy it was, how they had managed to liquidate the old man's asset before he even knew what hit him, before he could raise an objection. They were drunk on the intoxicating endorphins of sudden, unearned wealth, completely unaware, utterly oblivious, that the money they were staring at, the money they believed was their salvation, was, in fact, radioactive. It was poisoned. The movement of funds started almost immediately, a digital hemorrhage, frantic and desperate, designed to stop the bleeding in their real, chaotic lives. I watched, a grim, detached observer, as the numbers dropped on the screen with alarming rapidity, as they began what I privately termed the Great Purge. First, a wire transfer for $2 million to a shell corporation in Nevada. That was Vinny the Knuckles, the loan shark. Blake wasn't wasting a second. He was buying back his kneecaps, buying his physical safety with my legacy. I watched as the transaction cleared. Somewhere in a back room in downtown Los Angeles, a hulking figure with a baseball bat was likely crossing Blake's name off a very dangerous list, satisfied that his intimidation tactics had worked. Blake was safe, physically, at least, temporarily. Next came the transfer to the property management company in Santa Monica. $100,000. Back rent for the penthouse, plus exorbitant penalties, plus prepaying for the next 3 months. They weren't planning on downsizing, on adjusting their lifestyle. They were doubling down, clinging desperately to the illusion of their success, buying back their opulent penthouse, their fabricated status. Then came the credit card companies. American Express, Visa, MasterCard, Capital One. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. A torrent of digital currency, flying out of the account to clear balances that had been maxed out on designer clothes, extravagant dinners, and empty prestige. Within a single hour, nearly $4 million had vanished. Half the money, gone. Just to bring them back to zero, just to get them out of the gaping hole they had so recklessly dug for themselves. But they still had $4 million left. A substantial sum, a comfortable cushion for most, and that's when the raw, unbridled greed took over. That's when the primal survival instinct was replaced by the arrogant, self-congratulatory hubris that had put them in this mess in the first place. I saw a debit charge for $5,000 at a dealership in Beverly Hills. A deposit. I checked the merchant code. Exotic imports. Blake wasn't buying a sensible car to replace the leased Bentley he could barely afford. He was putting money down on a supercar, the Ferrari he had bragged about at dinner. He was rewarding himself for his supposed cleverness, for his deal of the century. Then came the airlines. A charge for $22,000. 2 one-way tickets to Paris. First class, open-ended return. They were running. They were cashing out and running away to live the European dream on my dime, to escape the consequences of their actions. They were going to eat croissants and drink vintage wine on the Seine, laughing about how they had outsmarted Art Pendleton, the clueless benefactor. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a bank alert, it was a text message. It was from Scarlett. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen, my heart heavy with a mixture of dread and grim anticipation. I opened the message. Dad, the sale is done. The money is in. Blake and I are heading to the airport tonight. We need space. We need to heal from all this toxicity. Do not try to find us. The motel is paid for until the end of the week. After that, you are going to have to figure it out. You are a resourceful man. You will be fine. Goodbye. I stared at the words, reading them over and over, letting the cold cruelty sink in. Toxicity. She called me times toxic after selling my home, Eleanor's home, to pay her gambling debts and fund her frivolous lifestyle. She told me to figure it out after stealing my retirement, after erasing my past. There was no apology. There was no offer to share a small portion of the proceeds to help me get settled, to find a new place to live. There was just a cold, hard dismissal, a casual, almost indifferent shrug. I was a loose end that had been cleanly cut. I was luggage that had been left on the tarmac, forgotten and unwanted. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The conversation, the relationship, was dead. I placed the phone face down on the table, silencing its digital pulse. I walked over to the mini-fridge and pulled out a bottle of water, its icy chill a small comfort against the inferno raging within. I sat back down in the cheap armchair and looked at the digital clock on the bedside table. The red numbers glowed in the semi-darkness, a stark, relentless march of time. 5:30 p.m. The countdown had truly begun. The next 6 hours were the longest of my life. I didn't turn on the flickering motel TV, its static hum a poor replacement for the ocean's rhythm. I didn't try to read a book. The words would have blurred, meaningless. I just sat there, utterly still, acting as the silent, unblinking witness to the relentless passage of time, to the slow, agonizing crawl towards midnight. Outside, the sun set over the distant highway, painting the sky a bruised purple before fading into an inky blackness. The traffic noise didn't let up, a constant drone of tires on pavement, a restless symphony of humanity. People going somewhere, people going home. I had no home, not anymore, not in the traditional sense. But neither did they. They just didn't know it yet. Their illusion of home was about to be shattered. I thought about the very nature of contracts. People, especially those who prioritize instant gratification, think they are just paper and ink, mere formalities that can be ignored, negotiated away, or simply circumvented. But a contract, I knew, was a living thing. It had a pulse, a relentless heartbeat. It had teeth, sharp and unforgiving. And the ground lease agreement I had signed 15 years ago, meticulously crafted, legally airtight, was a predator lying in wait. It was a dormant virus that had been sleeping silently in the county records office, waiting for a specific date and time to wake up and lethally attack its unsuspecting host. 9 p.m. Scarlett and Blake were probably at the airport lounge now, toasting their cleverness, clinking glasses, posting photos of their boarding passes to social media, gloating about their escape. They were feeling light. They were feeling unburdened, shedding the enormous weight of their failures and deftly transferring it onto my old shoulders. 10 p.m. The plane would be boarding soon, the gate agents making their final calls. They would be settling into their lie-flat seats, wrapping themselves in cashmere blankets, closing their eyes to dream of Parisian boutiques and lavish dinners. They thought they were flying away from their problems, from their responsibilities, from the consequences. In reality, they were flying headlong into a hurricane, a Category 5, 11 p.m., 1 hour left. My body, which had been so still, demanded movement. I stood up and paced the small, cramped room, my legs feeling stiff, my joints aching. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. Not frantic, not fearful. I wasn't nervous. I was eager. I felt like a demolition expert, watching the timer tick down on a building meticulously rigged with explosives. The charges were set. The perimeter was clear. All that was left was gravity, the inevitable force of consequence. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark, starless sky. Somewhere out there, soaring over the vast Atlantic Ocean, my daughter was sleeping, blissfully unaware. Somewhere in Laguna Beach, the rhythmic ocean was crashing against the rocks below a house that still stood, magnificent and serene, on land that was about to change hands without a single brick being moved, without a single sound. 11:59 p.m. 1 minute. I held my breath, waiting, the silence in the room almost unbearable. I thought of Eleanor. I thought of the day we bought that land, a wild, untamed cliffside parcel with limitless potential. I thought of the day I signed the deed over to Scarlett, believing, truly believing, I was securing her future, building her a foundation of security. I had secured her future. All right, I had secured her a future of brutal, undeniable accountability. The numbers on the digital clock flickered. The 59 vanished. 4 precise zeros appeared. Midnight. It happened in silence. There was no thunderclap. There was no siren wailing into the night. The earth didn't shake. But in the cold, unfeeling eyes of the law, the world had just shifted on its axis. The 15-year term of the ground lease between Sentinel Land Trusts, LLC, and Scarlett Pendleton Shaw had expired. There was no renewal on file. There was no extension. According to Clause 17, the reversionary interest was now active, a legal leviathan awakened from its slumber. The legal title to the improvements, the house, the pool, the garage, the very walls that Scarlett had so brazenly sold to Olympus Realty 8 hours ago, instantly and automatically reverted to the owner of the land. The house belonged to Sentinel Land Trusts. The house belonged to me, Arthur Pendleton. Scarlett had sold a house at 2 p.m. At midnight, that sale became a fraud. She had accepted $8 million for property she no longer owned. She had spent money that was proceeds from a theft, a colossal act of deception. Olympus Realty now held a deed that was worth less than the paper it was printed on, a worthless piece of parchment, because the underlying asset, the house itself, had vanished, legally, from their grasp. I let out a long, slow breath, a deep exhalation of absolute, unyielding resolve. It was done. The trap had sprung, the steel jaws had clamped shut, and the leg was caught, irrevocably. I walked over to the bed and picked up the phone. I didn't call Scarlett. It was far too late for her, too late for apologies, too late for pleas. I sent a text message to Jem. "It is midnight, Jem. The carriage is a pumpkin. Meet me at the sheriff's station at 7 a.m. Bring the eviction notice. We have some squatters to remove." I lay down on the lumpy mattress, staring up at the water-stained ceiling, a fitting canvas for my altered reality. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 48 hours, I slept. It was the deep, dreamless sleep of the righteous, of a man who had faced betrayal and found the strength to fight back. Tomorrow was going to be a very busy day. Tomorrow, the Barracuda was going back to the beach, and this time, he was reclaiming his territory. The morning sun over Laguna Beach is usually a soft, welcoming thing, a painter's masterpiece, bathing the ocean in shifting shades of gold and turquoise, dappling the cliffs with warm light. But at precisely 8 a.m. on that Friday morning, the pristine beauty was being brutally torn apart by the guttural roar of diesel engines, the discordant symphony of impending destruction. I sat in the plush, silent back of Jem Finch's black Maybach, parked discreetly just up the coast road, watching the demolition crew assemble like a mechanical army of destruction. Olympus Realty Holdings didn't waste time. They had brought 3 massive, yellow bulldozers, their blades gleaming ominously, a dumpster the size of a small house, and a crew of burly men in hard hats who looked ready to demolish not just concrete, but memories, for minimum wage. They were revving the engines, black, acrid smoke belching into the pristine, salty air, preparing to crush the home Eleanor and I had built, the very foundation of our shared life, into a fine dust and splintered memories. Standing near the edge of the driveway, looking utterly out of place amidst the heavy machinery and the rising dust, were Scarlett and Blake. They weren't there to mourn the house. They weren't there to say goodbye, to offer a final, lingering farewell to a cherished past. They were there to gloat, to bask in the perceived triumph of their ruthlessness. Blake was leaning casually against the hood of a hired limousine, its polished surface reflecting the morning sun, wearing a ridiculous beret that looked utterly absurd on his head, and smoking a thick, imported cigar that was far too large for his face. He looked like a caricature of a newly rich man, a lottery winner who didn't know how to wear the suit of success, only how to parade it. Scarlett was busy, as always, with her phone. She had a ring light set up on a portable tripod in the middle of the driveway, completely blocking the path of a worker trying to haul debris. She was filming, capturing her moment of victory for her ever-hungry social media audience. I watched through the Maybach's tinted glass as she posed, pouting her lips, throwing her arms wide with the ocean and the monstrous bulldozers in the background. I couldn't hear her from this distance, but I knew, with grim certainty, exactly what she was doing. She was creating content. She was framing the destruction of my life, her father's life, as the glorious beginning of her best life, her new beginnings. She was probably captioning it Paris-bound or manifesting my dreams, completely oblivious to the terrifying truth that she was standing on a landmine that had already been triggered, the timer irreversibly counting down. Jem sat beside me, adjusting his silk tie, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He looked nervous, his preference always for the hushed, controlled environment of boardrooms over the raw, unpredictable chaos of battlefields. But today, he was my consigliere, my legal sword and shield. "Are you ready, Art?" he asked, his voice low, filled with a quiet apprehension. "Once we step out of this car, the war begins. There is no turning back, no retreat." I adjusted my cufflinks. They were solid gold, intricately engraved with my initials, a defiant gift from a competitor I had utterly bankrupted in 1992, a chilling reminder of my past prowess. I wasn't wearing the stained windbreaker or the faded baseball cap anymore. I was wearing a charcoal gray Italian suit, perfectly tailored, that had cost more than Blake's leased Bentley. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the bright morning sun. My silver hair was neatly combed back, revealing the sharp, intelligent lines of my face. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like the man who signed the checks, the man who owned the bank, the man who controlled the very ground beneath their feet. "I am ready, Jem," I said, my voice resonating with an unyielding steel. "Let's go say hello to the children. It's time they learned a very expensive lesson." The driver, a discreet, professional man, opened my door, and I stepped out onto the pavement. The roar of the bulldozers was deafening now, a grinding metallic shriek that vibrated in my teeth, a cacophony of impending destruction. I buttoned my jacket, the gesture a physical act of defiance, and began to walk down the driveway, my stride long, purposeful, each step imbued with decades of unwavering resolve. Jem walked a step behind me, to my right, clutching his black leather briefcase as if it contained the very fate of the world, which, in a way, it did. It held the lethal paperwork. Behind us, trailing by a few yards, was a third man. He was wearing a crisp beige uniform with a silver star on his chest and a sidearm on his hip. Sheriff Miller. He was a good man, a man who respected the letter of the law, and more importantly, a man who knew how to read a deed, a contract, and an eviction notice with meticulous precision. We were halfway down the long, curving driveway before anyone truly noticed us. A foreman from Olympus Realty, a burly man with a clipboard, a permanent scowl etched on his face, and a booming voice, spotted us first. He marched over, waving his hand aggressively, his face contorted in annoyance. "Hey, you!" he shouted over the deafening noise of the engines, his voice a gravelly roar. "This is a closed construction site. Private property. No spectators. Turn around and get out of here before I call the cops." I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I walked straight toward him, my gaze unwavering, until I was just 2 feet away. I looked him up and down with the kind of dismissive, clinical appraisal I used to reserve for underperforming junior executives, men who had failed to meet expectations. "I suggest you turn off those engines," I said, my voice calm, steady, but cutting through the industrial noise like a razor blade. "Unless you want to be liable for catastrophic damages to my time's property." The foreman blinked, genuinely confused by my tone, my expensive suit, my unwavering confidence. He was used to yelling at trespassers, at curious onlookers, not at men who looked like they owned the bank that financed his bulldozers. "Your property?" he spat, a sneer twisting his lips. "Listen, buddy, are you lost? We bought this place yesterday. We have the title. Now move, Grandpa, or I'll have security literally throw you out." Grandpa, that dismissive word, laced with contempt, seemed to trigger something in Scarlett. She spun around from her ring light, her eyes widening behind her oversized designer sunglasses when she saw me, a sudden flicker of disbelief. For a second, she looked utterly confused, as if she couldn't reconcile the image of the defeated, senile old man she had left at the motel with the imposing, self-assured figure standing in her driveway. But then, the arrogance, the delusion of her new wealth, kicked back in, acting like an impenetrable shield against the encroaching reality. "Dad!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and laced with annoyance, her carefully cultivated composure cracking. "What are you doing here? You're ruining my shot! I told you to stay at the motel. This is so embarrassing." Blake looked up from his phone, his jaw dropping slightly as he took in my appearance, my suit, my resolute stance. He took a theatrical step forward, trying to look menacing, trying to project an aura of authority. But he just looked like a child playing dress-up, a man desperately out of his depth. "Art," he said, puffing out his chest, trying to sound authoritative. "We told you to get lost. The deal is done. The money is in the bank. You don't live here anymore. You are trespassing. Go back to your sad little room and wait for the nursing home bus. You are embarrassing yourself and, quite frankly, me and Scarlett." I looked at them, my daughter and my son-in-law. They looked so confident, so utterly sure of their victory. They had the money. They had the tickets to Paris. They thought I was just a ghost, a pathetic apparition come back to haunt them one last time before fading away into the forgotten past. I am not here to embarrass myself, Blake, I said, my voice projecting clearly, cutting through the idling engines with surprising force. And I am not here to visit. I am here to reclaim what is mine. Scarlett marched over to me, her expensive heels clicking angrily on the asphalt pavement. She got right in my face, invading my personal space, her breath smelling of expensive perfume, stale champagne, and a desperate, frantic energy. Dad, stop this. You are making a scene. Olympus Realty owns this place now. They are about to tear it down. Just leave. Why do you have to make everything so difficult? Just go away and let us be happy. Let us enjoy our lives. She reached out to push me, to physically shove her own father off the property she thought she had so cleverly sold, to assert her new, fabricated authority. But she never made contact. Sheriff Miller stepped out from behind Jem, his presence solid, unyielding. He didn't say a word. He just placed his hand casually on his belt, near his badge, a silent but potent warning. Scarlett froze, her hand hovering awkwardly in midair, her eyes darting frantically from me to the sheriff. And for the very first time, a genuine, undeniable crack appeared in her carefully constructed mask of arrogance. "What is going on?" she whispered, her voice trembling, a nascent fear creeping in. "Why is the sheriff here? Did you call the police on us, Dad? For selling the house? It's legal. It's in my name. You can't arrest us for selling Times, my own house, asterisk." The Olympus Realty foreman, his face now a mask of confusion, stepped in, looking at the sheriff nervously. "Officer, we have all the permits. We have the deed right here. This man is trespassing. We need him removed immediately so we can proceed with demolition. We have a schedule to keep." I turned to the foreman, my gaze unwavering. "You have a deed for the structure," I said calmly, each word precise, like a surgeon's cut. "That is correct. You bought a house. A very nice house, indeed. $12 million worth of wood, glass, and concrete. That much is true." "See?" Todd shouted, pointing a triumphant finger at me, desperation making him reckless. "He admits it. He's just senile. Get him out of here." "But," I continued, raising my voice slightly to silence him, my gaze never leaving the foreman's now pale face. "You forgot to check what the house was sitting on. A fundamental oversight, I'd say." I nodded to Jem. He stepped forward, a quiet, almost regal presence, and snapped open his black leather briefcase. He pulled out a document with a distinctive blue legal cover and handed it, with a flourish, to the foreman. "What is this?" the foreman asked, his voice hesitant now, a thread of uncertainty weaving through it as he took the paper. "That," I said, a cold, almost predatory smile spreading across my face, "is a certified copy of the ground lease agreement, dated March 12, 2005, between Sentinel Land Trusts, LLC, and Scarlett Pendleton Shaw." Scarlett frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Sentinel Land Trusts? What is that? I never heard of that. You never told me about that, Dad." "You signed it, Scarlett," I said, my gaze cutting into her, a silent accusation. 15 years ago, you signed a lease to rent the very land this house sits on. And if you look at Clause 17, you will see that the lease had a specific term of exactly 15 years. No more, no less." "So what?" Blake sneered, trying desperately to regain control of a narrative that was rapidly spinning out of his grasp. "It's just some old paperwork. We own the house. The deal is done." I looked at Blake. I looked at him with the chilling pity one feels for an animal that doesn't know it has already been shot, its life draining away, oblivious to its impending demise. "The lease expired last night, Blake," I said softly, the words a gentle, fatal whisper. "At midnight, PST. And since you didn't renew it, since you were too busy selling the house behind my back, too busy dreaming of private jets and Ferraris to bother reading the contracts that govern your own supposed assets, the reversionary clause kicked in, precisely as designed." I turned back to the foreman, whose face had gone from red to a sickly shade of gray as he frantically read the document, his eyes wide with dawning horror. "Tell them what that means, sir," I said to the foreman, my voice calm, steady. "Tell them who owns the house now. Tell them the legal reality. The foreman looked up from the paper, his hands visibly shaking. He looked at Scarlett, then at me, then at the massive bulldozers idling silently behind him, machines of destruction suddenly rendered utterly impotent. "It says," he stammered, his voice choked with disbelief, "it says that upon expiration, all improvements and structures revert immediately and automatically to the lesser." "And who is the lesser?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet resonating with inescapable power. He looked at the bottom of the page, his eyes fixed on the bolded name. "Sentinel Land Trusts, LLC," he croaked, his voice barely audible. "And who owns Sentinel Land Trusts?" I asked, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a crisp, elegant business card. I handed it to him. He read the name on the card, his eyes wide with a horrifying understanding. Arthur Pendleton, President. The silence that descended on the driveway was absolute, profound. The seagulls seemed to stop crying. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Even the mighty bulldozers seemed to quiet down, their engines suddenly still, silenced by the sheer, crushing weight of the revelation. "That means," I said, my voice ringing like a bell, cutting through the stunned silence, "that as of 12/1 this morning, this house, this beautiful home, legally belongs to me, not to Scarlett, and certainly not to Olympus Realty Holdings, who bought a ghost." I turned to Scarlett. She was white as a sheet, her face utterly drained of color. Her mouth was opening and closing, but no sound, no coherent thought, was coming out. "You sold a house you didn't own, honey," I said, my voice devoid of warmth, a chilling pronouncement. "You took $8 million for a property that legally reverted to me whilst you were sleeping, whilst you were dreaming of luxury. That is called fraud, a very serious crime. And I believe the buyers," I gestured to the foreman, who was now frantically dialing a number on his phone, his fingers fumbling with panicked urgency, "are going to want their money back, immediately, with interest, and with extreme prejudice." Blake looked like he was going to vomit, his face green, his bravado utterly evaporated. "But we spent it. We paid the debts. We bought the tickets. We booked the Ferrari," he stammered, his voice cracking with pure terror. I stepped closer to him. I leaned in until I could smell the cold, metallic scent of fear sweating out of his pores. "Then I suggest you start running, Blake," I said, my voice a lethal whisper, "because the sheriff isn't here for me. He is here for the people who just committed grand larceny, for the people who perpetrated a massive real estate fraud. And now he's going to do his job." I signaled to Sheriff Miller. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate, unhurried, pulling a pair of gleaming handcuffs from his belt. The cold metal glinted in the morning sun, a chilling harbinger of their fate. "Scarlett Pendleton Shaw." "Blake Shaw," the sheriff said, his voice devoid of sympathy. A flat, official pronouncement. "I have a warrant for your arrest for real estate fraud, grand theft by deception, and conspiracy. Please turn around and place your hands behind your backs." The scream that Scarlett let out wasn't human. It was a raw, primal sound of a life shattering, of a meticulously constructed dream dying a brutal, agonizing death on a Laguna Beach driveway. It was the sound of her imagined future, her Parisian escape, collapsing into dust. And as I watched the sheriff click the cold steel cuffs onto my daughter's wrists, binding her to a reality she had so desperately tried to avoid, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a contract fulfilled, a meticulously planned strategy executed to perfection. The eviction was over, the landlord had returned, and the tenants, the treacherous tenants, were being removed, permanently. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned, echoing silence of the morning air like a surgical knife through silk, addressing the Olympus Realty executive who had now joined the foreman, his face a mask of dawning horror. "You need to listen very, very carefully, because your entire legal standing, your $8 million investment, is about to evaporate. You purchased a structure, you bought a pile of wood, glass, drywall, and concrete. That is what my daughter held title to. That is what was listed on the deed she signed yesterday. A building, a dwelling, an improvement on real property. I took a deliberate step closer to the executive, who was looking at me with a terrifying mixture of professional annoyance and a rapidly growing, palpable unease. But you forgot the most fundamental rule of real estate, gentlemen. The very first lesson you learn in property law. You forgot to ask who owns the dirt underneath it. You bought the house. Yes, that much is undeniable. But the land, the sand, the bedrock, the very earth that supports that foundation, that belongs to me. It has always belonged to me. And as of midnight last night, the contract that allowed that house to sit on my land, the ground lease, ceased to exist. It expired, precisely as written. Scarlet, her face streaked with tears, still clinging to a desperate, fading hope, let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh, a sound that bordered on hysteria. Dad, what are you talking about? You gave me the house years ago. And we have the papers. Stop trying to confuse everyone. You're just embarrassed because you have to leave. I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes locked on the Olympus Realty executive, his carefully composed corporate facade beginning to crack under the pressure. Do you know what a ground lease is, sir? I asked, my voice calm, steady, infused with an unyielding authority. It is a very specific type of arrangement, a sophisticated legal instrument. I own the land. My daughter, Scarlet, leased the right to keep a structure on it. That lease had a term of precisely 15 years. It expired at 12/1 this morning. There was no renewal. There was no extension. And under the laws of the state of California, and specifically under Clause 17 of the contract that your due diligence team somehow catastrophically missed when a ground lease expires without renewal, the ownership of all improvements reverts immediately and automatically to the landowner. To me, I pointed a finger at the sprawling mansion behind them, the symbol of their supposed triumph. That house is no longer Scarlett's property. And since she sold it to you times after times, her rights had already expired. And since the transfer of ownership was contingent on a valid lease that no longer exists, you currently hold a deed to absolutely nothing. You paid $8 million for a ghost, a legal fiction. The foreman's face, already pale, went from a sickly shade of gray to an ashen white. He snatched the blue-covered document from his subordinate's trembling hands and began to flip through it frantically, his eyes darting across the dense legalese. He wasn't a lawyer, but he knew enough about construction contracts, about the bedrock of property ownership, to know when he was looking at an unmitigated disaster, a financial catastrophe of epic proportions. He pulled out his phone and frantically dialed a number, his fingers fumbling over the screen. "Get legal on the line," he barked into the phone, his voice ragged with panic. "Now! I don't care if it's 6 a.m, wake them up. We have a critical situation at the Laguna Beach site." Jem stepped forward, his demeanor now utterly calm and professional, the perfect counterweight to the rising panic on the driveway. He opened his briefcase again, a quiet, almost theatrical gesture, and pulled out a certified file. He handed it to the executive, a man in a crisply tailored suit who had just stepped out of a black SUV behind the foreman, presumably a project manager or regional director for Olympus Realty. "Here is the chain of title," Jem said smoothly, his voice a balm of controlled authority. "You will see the original recording of the ground lease in 2005. You will see the creation of Sentinel Land Trusts, LLC. And you will see the precise expiration date, March 12, 2020, yesterday." The executive took the file, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes scanning the pages with increasing urgency. He stopped at the title search section, the crucial due diligence report that should have flagged this, and his breath hitched in his throat. "Oh my God," he whispered, the words barely audible. "What is it?" the foreman demanded, his face contorted in a desperate plea for understanding. The executive looked up, his face pale, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. "The title search, the preliminary report we ran last week, it only checked the grantor index for Scarlett Pendleton Shaw. It didn't cross-reference the underlying land parcel ID against the LLC registry. They missed it. They missed Sentinel Land Trusts entirely. A complete, unpardonable oversight. Blake, desperate, delusional, stepped in, trying to regain control of a narrative that was now spinning wildly, violently out of his grasp. So what? So you missed some paperwork? We still have the money. The deal is closed. You can't just undo a sale because of a technicality. The executive turned to look at Blake. His eyes were no longer those of a business partner, of a professional colleague. They were the eyes of a man who realized he had just been utterly, irrevocably swindled. "This isn't a technicality, you idiot," he roared, his voice shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. "This is the very foundation of property law. If you don't own the land, and your lease to use the land has expired, you don't own the building. You sold us a property that, as of this morning, belongs to Times Him **. He pointed a furious finger at me. I stood there, adjusting my cufflinks, letting the full, crushing weight of the moment settle on them, on the entire Olympus Realty team. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant sound of the waves and the ragged, heavy breathing of the stunned Olympus team. "That means," I said, speaking directly to the executive, my voice resonating with an unyielding clarity, "that my daughter, Scarlett Pendleton Shaw, just sold you my Times property. She took your $8 million for an asset she had absolutely no legal right to transfer. In legal terms, gentlemen, that is called fraud. That is called theft by deception. And since the amount exceeds nearly every statutory limit, we are talking about grand larceny on a massive, criminal scale." I turned my gaze to Scarlett. She was trembling now, uncontrollably, her hands clutching her designer bag as if it were a flimsy shield against the encroaching storm. The brutal reality was crashing down on her. The Paris trip, the freedom, the victory. It was all dissolving like sugar in hot water, evaporating into thin air. "You sold a house that wasn't yours, Scarlett," I said softly, the words a gentle but lethal blow. "You committed a felony. And you did it to a very powerful, very litigious development company. A company that has deep pockets and no mercy for those who defraud them. Do you think they are just going to walk away? Do you think they are simply going to absorb an $8 million loss and call it a bad day?" The Olympus executive slammed the file shut, a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. He turned on Scarlett with a ferocity that made her physically recoil, taking a desperate step back. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Did you know about the lease? About this ground lease agreement?" I, Scarlett stammered, looking frantically from me to Blake, her eyes wide with terror, searching for an escape, a lifeline. "I didn't know. I mean, Dad handled all the paperwork years ago. I thought it was mine. I really did." "Ignorance of the law is not a defense, ma'am," the executive snapped, his voice crackling with rage. "And negligence isn't an excuse for theft. We transferred $8 million to your account yesterday. I want it back. Now. Every single penny." Blake stepped in front of Scarlett, trying to bluster his way through, clinging to the last vestiges of his arrogance. "Hey, watch your tone. The money is ours. The deal is done. If you have a problem with the title, take it up with your insurance. We are leaving for Paris tonight." "You are not going anywhere, you imbecile," the executive roared, his face contorted with fury. He motioned to the foreman, who immediately signaled the security team, burly men who emerged from another black SUV, their faces grim. "Block the driveway. No one leaves this property. Now." He turned back to Todd and Scarlett, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, his eyes glinting with cold, hard menace. "You are going to return that wire transfer immediately. I want every single cent back in our escrow account within the hour. If you don't, I am not just suing you for every penny you possess. I am pressing criminal charges. I will have you arrested for wire fraud, for real estate fraud, and for conspiracy. You will spend the next 20 years in a cell, not in Paris. Do you understand me?" Blake's face crumpled. The arrogance, the swagger, the dreams of Ferraris and Parisian boulevards. It all drained out of him like air from a punctured tire, leaving behind a terrified, whimpering man. "But we can't," he whispered, his voice barely audible, a pathetic plea. "What do you mean you can't?" the executive demanded, incredulous. "It's been less than 24 hours. How could you possibly spend $8 million? We had debts," Scarlett cried out, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup, making her look like a tragic clown. "We had to pay them. The sharks! The landlord! The credit cards! It's gone! We spent $4 million. The admission hung in the air, toxic and irreversible. $4 million gone. The executive looked at them with pure disgust, his face a mask of contempt. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number, his movements sharp, decisive. Legal, he said into the phone, his voice a low growl. Get the district attorney on the line. Yes, immediately. We have a fraud case in Laguna Beach. $8 million. Perpetrators are on site. Yes, I want them in custody now. I watched as Scarlett's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the driveway, a heap of shimmering silver dress and shattered dreams, sobbing hysterically into her hands. Blake looked around wildly, his eyes darting from side to side, as if desperately searching for an escape route, a hidden path to freedom. But Sheriff Miller was standing there, his hand resting casually on his belt, watching the entire scene unfold with the impassive, unyielding gaze of the law. I walked over to where Scarlett was kneeling, a broken figure. I looked down at her. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with terror, streaked with mascara. "Daddy, please," she begged, her voice raw, desperate, tearing at my heart despite everything. "Please, help us. You can fix this. You own the land. Just sign an extension. Just renew the lease. If you renew it, the sale is valid. They will let us keep the money. Please. They are going to put me in jail, Daddy." I looked at her, truly looked at her. I saw glimpses of the little girl I had raised, the child I used to carry on my shoulders, whose skinned knees I had kissed. But I also saw the woman who had evicted me 24 hours ago, the woman who had laughed about leaving me to rot in a state facility. I saw the woman who had thrown her mother's cherished memory into a trash bag like it was garbage. I could times save her. All it would take was a single signature. I could extend the lease, validate the sale, and let them walk away with the remaining $4 million, a fortune I never intended for myself. I could take the hit. I could let them win, just to keep my daughter out of prison. That is what a father is supposed to do, isn't it? Sacrifice himself for his children, no matter what. But then I remembered the toast on the patio of the Azure Coast Bistro, to Arthur Pendleton, the clueless benefactor. I remembered Blake's smug pronouncement, survival of the fittest. They weren't asking for forgiveness because they were genuinely sorry, because they had seen the error of their ways. They were asking for a bailout because they were caught, because their carefully constructed web of lies had unraveled, because their freedom was at stake. If I saved them now, they wouldn't learn. They would just think they had gotten away with it, that I was weak, that my love was an exploitable resource. They would do it again, emboldened by my perceived weakness. I leaned down close to her, my voice a quiet whisper, ensuring she would hear every single syllable, every word imbued with the weight of consequence. "I could fix it, Scarlett," I whispered. "I truly could, but I won't." Her eyes went wide, the last vestiges of hope draining from them, leaving behind a horrifying, empty fear. "Why, Daddy, why won't you?" "Because you broke the contract," I said, standing up straight, buttoning my jacket. The gesture, a final, decisive act. "You broke the contract of family. You broke the contract of decency. You broke the contract of respect. And now, you are going to learn how the real world works, Scarlett. You don't get bailed out when you burn down your own house, when you destroy your own foundations. You get burned. You face the fire you started." I turned to Sheriff Miller and nodded, a silent command. "Do your job, Sheriff." The sheriff stepped forward, pulling the handcuffs from his belt again. The cold metal clicked shut as he secured Scarlett's wrists behind her back. She screamed, a raw, primal sound of disbelief, of utter devastation. Blake, seeing his wife in chains, made a split-second calculation. I saw it happen in his eyes, a flicker of loyalty, quickly extinguished by the overwhelming instinct for self-preservation. He bolted. He didn't run like an athlete. He ran like a desperate, terrified man, his expensive loafers slipping on the loose gravel of the driveway. He scrambled toward the side gate, his arms pumping wildly, leaving his wife alone in the custody of the law, a pathetic display of cowardice that told me everything I ever needed to know about the man my daughter had chosen. He didn't make it far. 2 security guards from the Olympus Realty team, big men who looked like they enjoyed their work, intercepted him before he even reached the street. One of them tackled him, sending him sprawling hard into the dust. Blake hit the ground with a sickening thud, his ridiculous beret flying off into a puddle of oil leaking from one of the bulldozers. He screamed as they pinned him down, his face pressed into the very dirt of the land he thought he had conquered. "Get off me!" he shrieked, his voice high and shrill, utterly stripped of its former bravado. "I didn't do it. It was her idea. She owned the house. I just helped. I'm innocent." Sheriff Miller walked over to where Blake was pinned, pulling a second pair of cuffs from his belt. He hauled Blake up by the back of his jacket, dust and grime covering the white dinner jacket he had worn to celebrate his fleeting victory. "You're an accomplice, son," the sheriff said, cuffing him roughly. "And fleeing the scene just added resisting arrest to your list of problems. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it. Now." With both of them restrained, the brutal, unyielding reality of their situation truly set in. The adrenaline of the chase was gone, replaced by the cold, hard certainty of impending prison time. They were trapped, they were caught, and they realized, in that agonizing moment, that there was only one person in the world who could save them. They turned to me. Scarlett, with tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup, making her look like a tragic clown, dropped to her knees in the gravel. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was a terrified child, looking for her father to fix a broken toy, to make the nightmare disappear. "Daddy, please," she wailed, the sound tearing at my heart despite everything she had done. "You have to stop this. You can't let them take me to jail. I'm your daughter. Look at me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stood still, my face impassive, though inside, a violent storm still raged, a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. "Daddy, listen to me," she continued, her voice desperate and fast, the words tumbling out in a torrent. "It's just a signature. That's all it is. You own the land. You can sign a retroactive extension of the lease. If you extend the lease, the sale is valid. Olympus gets the house. We get to keep the money. And nobody goes to jail. Please, Daddy, just sign the paper. We are family. Blood is thicker than water. You can't do this to your own flesh and blood." I looked at her. Family. She used the word like a weapon, like a magic spell that was supposed to erase the last 6 months of neglect, cruelty, and calculated betrayal. She invoked the sacred bond of blood only when she herself was bleeding, when her own self-serving world was collapsing around her. Blake, seeing Scarlett begging, decided to join the chorus, his pride utterly shattered. He shuffled forward on his knees, an awkward, humiliating movement for a grown man. He looked up at me, tears making tracks through the dust and grime on his face, mingling with the last vestiges of his expensive cologne. "Art, please. Oh, God, please help us. You don't understand. The people we paid. The Sharks. Vinny. The Knuckles. If we go to jail, we can't pay the interest. They will find us inside. They have reach. They will kill me, Art. I am begging you. I made a mistake. I was stupid. But I don't want to die. Save us. You are the only one who can save us." I looked down at them, my daughter and my son-in-law, kneeling in the dirt, begging for their lives, for their freedom, for a second chance they hadn't earned. It was a scene from a Greek tragedy, a stark tableau of hubris and downfall. The mighty had fallen, and they had fallen right at my feet, their pleas echoing in the crisp morning air. I had the power. It was true. I could ask Jem to draft a 1-page addendum, simple, concise. I could sign it. I could retroactively validate the lease. I could make the fraud disappear, erase the criminal charges. I could absorb the loss of my home, the pain of their betrayal, just to save them from the brutal consequences of their own actions. It would be the noble thing to do, the fatherly thing to do, the self-sacrificing act. But then I looked at the black trash bags still piled near the garage, still waiting for collection. I saw the corner of Eleanor's photo frame sticking out, a mute testament to their callous disregard. I remembered the cold, impersonal air of the Ponderosa Inn motel room they had dumped me in. I remembered the toast at the Azure Coast Bistro to Art Pendleton, the clueless benefactor. And I remembered Scarlett's words, so cold, so cutting. If he dies alone in some state facility, well, that's just nature taking its course. Survival of the fittest. They weren't asking for forgiveness because they were genuinely sorry, because their hearts were touched by remorse. They were asking for a bailout because they were caught, because their lives were on the brink of ruin. If I saved them now, they wouldn't learn a single thing. They would just think they had gotten away with it, that I was weak, easily manipulated, and they would undoubtedly do it again, emboldened by my mercy. I took a step closer to Scarlett. I looked deep into her eyes, searching, truly searching, for the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders, the child whose dreams I had once nurtured. But she wasn't there. Only a stranger remained, a woman consumed by greed and entitlement. "You are right, Scarlett," I said softly, my voice filled with a profound, almost surgical sadness. "I could sign, I could save you, but yesterday, when I asked you why you were doing this, why you were selling my home, you told me it was because you needed the money. You told me I was a burden, a liability holding you back from the life you deserved. You told me to figure it out. You told me to go to a shelter if I ran out of money." "Daddy, I didn't mean it," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "You meant every word," I corrected her, my voice unwavering. "You meant it when you sold my home. You meant it when you celebrated. And now, you mean it when you beg. But family isn't a safety net you can cut and then expect to catch you when you fall, Scarlett. Not anymore. Not after what you did." I looked at Blake, who was still whimpering, still pleading. "And you, Blake, you want me to save you from the sharks? You invited the sharks into our lives. You gambled with money that wasn't yours, with assets you didn't truly understand. I am not your savior, Blake. I am just the landlord, and you are trespassing, on my land, in my home, with stolen money." I turned away from them. I couldn't look at them anymore. The pain was too great, too profound, a wound that might never truly heal. But the resolve, the absolute certainty of my course of action, was stronger. "Take them away, Sheriff," I said, my voice breaking slightly, a hairline fracture in my steel composure. "Please, just take them away." "No, Daddy, no!" Scarlett screamed as Sheriff Miller and his deputy hauled them up, roughly but professionally, and dragged them toward the waiting patrol cars. Blake was sobbing uncontrollably, his pleas for mercy, his desperate appeals for a second chance, echoing in the air, chances he had already squandered, thrown away with reckless abandon. I stood there, utterly motionless, watching them go. I didn't move until the patrol cars disappeared around the bend of the coast road, their sirens wailing a mournful, fading song, a requiem for a family broken beyond repair. The silence returned to the driveway, heavy and suffocating, thick with the residue of shattered dreams and broken promises. The Olympus Realty executive was already back on his phone, screaming at his lawyers, trying desperately to salvage his career, to contain the financial bleeding. The construction crew, their bulldozers silent and useless, monstrous yellow beasts with no master, were packing up their tools, their work for the day rendered moot. I was alone. I had won. But standing there, in the wreckage of my family, with the cool wind blowing in from the vast, indifferent ocean, it didn't feel like a victory. Not a triumphant one. It felt like a necessary amputation. I had cut off the infected limb, the cancerous growth, to save the body, to save myself. And now, I had to learn how to live with the scar, the indelible mark of their betrayal. The dust from the scuffle was settling on the driveway, coating the shiny leather of Blake's discarded loafers, and the hem of Scarlett's ruined silver dress, a fine, gritty layer of shame. I looked down at them, my shadow stretching long and dark over their kneeling forms, a silent, unyielding judge. It was a strange reversal of gravity, a cruel twist of fate. Just 48 hours ago, I had been the one feeling small, feeling discarded, standing in this exact spot while they loomed over me with their youth, their arrogance, their contempt. Now they were the ones on the ground, reduced to weeping children by the inevitable consequences of their own insatiable greed, their reckless choices. Scarlett looked up at me, her mascara running in black streaks down her face, mingling with her tears, making her look like a truly tragic clown, a grotesque parody of her former self. Her hands were twisted awkwardly behind her back in the cold steel of the handcuffs. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming, raw with desperation. "Please, we are family. You can't let them take us away. We are your blood." I stared at her, and for a fleeting moment the image flickered. I didn't see the woman in handcuffs. I saw the daughter who had called me on the phone 2 days ago, her voice cold and devoid of empathy, saying, "You need to move out. We sold it." I heard Blake's casual, cruel laugh as he threw Eleanor's cherished wedding photo into the trash bin like it was garbage. I felt, with startling clarity, the cold, impersonal air of the Ponderosa Inn motel room they had so callously dumped me in, leaving me for forgotten. "Family," I repeated, testing the word on my tongue. It tasted like ash, bitter and acrid. "You keep using that word, Scarlett. You use it like a magic spell that is supposed to erase everything you did, everything you said. But where was family when you evicted me? Where was family when you blocked my number, severing all contact? Where was family when you laughed about leaving me to rot in a state facility so you could buy handbags in Paris? Tell me, Scarlett, where was family then?" I took a half step closer, leaning down slightly, ensuring they wouldn't miss a single syllable, a single inflection of my cold, hard truth. "When you sold this house, you told me I was a burden," I said, my voice quiet, chillingly controlled. "You said I was a liability, holding you back from the life you deserved. You treated me like a bad debt that needed to be written off, a problem to be solved through my disappearance. Well, look at where we are now. The tables have turned. I am not a burden anymore, Scarlett. I am the creditor, and you are in default, a very serious default." Blake made a whimpering sound, trying to shuffle toward me on his knees, a pathetic, crawling movement, but the deputy held him back with a firm grip. "Art, please," he choked out, tears mixing with the dust on his face. "We learned our lesson. We get it. Just sign the paper. Don't let us go to prison." I looked at Blake with a detachment that surprised even me. I didn't hate him. Hate requires energy, requires passion, an investment of emotion. I just felt nothing. He was a bad investment, a catastrophic one. I should have liquidated years ago. "You didn't learn a lesson, Blake," I said, my voice flat, empty of emotion. "You just got caught. There is a profound difference. If I save you now, you will just hate me for seeing you weak, for witnessing your humiliation. You will wait for me to die so you can try again. I am not going to give you that chance." I straightened up, adjusting the cuffs of my jacket, a final, definitive gesture. I turned away from them, breaking the desperate eye contact they were trying so hard to maintain. I looked at Jem, who was standing by the Maybach, clutching his briefcase, his face pale, etched with the profound weight of the law he championed. He knew the law better than anyone, and he knew exactly what was about to happen to them, the full, devastating force of justice. He looked at me, a question in his eyes, a silent plea for a moment of mercy. "Art," Jem said softly, his voice barely audible amidst the rising tension. "Olympus Realty is going to sue them for the $8 million, plus punitive damages, plus legal fees. The district attorney is going to press for maximum sentences on the fraud charges. If we add a civil suit from Sentinel Land Trusts for unauthorized sale and damages to the property, for the violation of the ground lease, they will never see the light of day. They will be utterly, completely ruined in every conceivable way. Financially, legally, socially. Do you want me to file the papers?" he asked, his voice heavy with the gravity of the decision. I looked back at the patrol cars. The deputies were beginning to lift Scarlett and Blake off the ground, guiding their struggling, protesting forms toward the back seats. They were struggling, crying, looking back at me one last time with eyes full of betrayal, as if times were the one who had wronged times them asterisk, who had somehow failed them. I took a deep breath, smelling the clean, crisp ocean air that was finally, irrevocably, mine again. "No, Jem," I said, my voice firm, unwavering. Don't file the civil suit. Let that part go. Jem blinked, surprised by my unexpected restraint. Are you sure, Art? They tried to steal $12 million from you? Your home? Your legacy? I know, I replied, my gaze fixed on the disappearing patrol cars. But let Olympus Realty destroy them. Let the criminal justice system handle them. Let the loan sharks and the creditors pick over the carcass of their lives. That is enough. I don't need to pile on. I don't need their money, not the paltry remains, and I don't need their suffering on my conscience more than it already is. That, Jem, I said, my voice quiet, reflective, is my final act of mercy. I am not going to sue them. I am just going to let them face the consequences. The full, unvarnished consequences. I protected them their entire lives. Now they face the world they created. Daddy, wait! Scarlett's scream was muffled as the door of the patrol car slammed shut with a heavy, final thud, sealing her fate. Blake was already in the other vehicle, his head bowed against the window, his form a picture of utter defeat. I didn't turn around. I didn't flinch. I just started walking. I walked past the stunned Olympus Realty executives, who were frantically trying to save their own skins, their careers. I walked past the silent bulldozers, their yellow bulk now a testament to thwarted ambition. I walked past the exact spot where Eleanor's wedding photo had been so casually thrown into the trash. I walked all the way to Jem's Maybach and got in the back seat. Drive, Jem, I said, staring straight ahead, my gaze fixed on the road before us, on a future I now had to rebuild. Just drive. Take me home. As the car pulled away, leaving the scene of wreckage and regret behind, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I knew what was back there. A tragedy of my own making. A disaster born of spoiling children who never learned the true value of $1, the weight of a promise, or the sanctity of respect. I closed my eyes and let the low, comforting hum of the engine drown out the lingering memory of their desperate pleas, their final, pathetic cries for mercy. It was over. The barracuda had bitten back, hard and decisively. But the taste of blood, this particular blood, wasn't sweet. It was just necessary. The most painful lesson of my life was realizing that blood, the mere biological connection, does not guarantee loyalty, does not guarantee love, does not guarantee respect. I had spent years thinking that being a good father meant giving endlessly, providing without question. But I was only enabling their destruction, fueling their entitlement. True love, genuine connection, sometimes requires boundaries. By letting my children face the brutal consequences of their greed, I didn't just save myself. I gave them the only chance they had to actually grow, to understand the true cost of their actions. Never sacrifice your dignity, your peace, your very self, for people who only value your utility, your financial worth. You can rebuild a fortune, you can rebuild a home, but you cannot rebuild your self-respect once you have given it away to those who do not deserve it. If you believe that respect must be earned, that consequences are a brutal but necessary teacher, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever had to cut ties with a family member, with your own flesh and blood, to save your own peace, to save your very soul? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay strong.